Okay. All right. I guess breakfast is pretty exciting, huh? I heard some, anybody want to share what they had for breakfast? Anybody want to share?
I had my name is Jasmine. I had a strawberry toasted strudel
That sounds good.
and coconut milk.
Ooh, that sounds good. Can you?
I had an avocado toast.
I love avocado toast. Oh my gosh. Lovely. All right. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so these are our objectives for today. First of all, I'm gonna share a journey to medical interpreting, then why we need to provide language access, the code of ethics and standards of practice for the medical interpreter, the skills of a medical interpreter, interpreters at work. Where do we work, right? It doesn't have to be a hospital, it could be at a clinic too. And the path of certification. All right. So, all right. So first off, share my journey, and share my journey starts with my background. All right. So where are you from? I get asked this question. I'm sure everybody else has too. And I think this question for me, it gets a little bit complicated. Not complicated, but I think what is the context? What is the conversation from it, right? If they're asked, if I'm in California, then, oh, where are you from? I'm from Hawaii. That's how it's going. Now, but if I'm in a different conversation, I might say, oh, I'm born in Hong Kong and I grew up in Hawaii, right? I'm sure some of you have that same experience. You're not, you're born in a different country, right? And then you also think, well, what are they asking me for? I was born, where I grew up. So it's a little bit complicated, right? So for me, like I said, I was born in Hong Kong. I was born when it was still a British colony. And anybody know when the Hong Kong handover was? 1997. 1997, yeah. So before 1997, a lot of families, a lot of people in Hong Kong, they didn't know what's going to happen right after the handover. And so many people immigrated to the US, to Australia, to Canada, and other parts of the world because they weren't sure what was going to happen, right? For me and my family, we immigrated when I was 5. And it was not because of the handover. It was more because my dad um, found a transition to a job in England. So that's where we landed in England. Um, so once we landed in England, my parents realized really quickly that, I was 5, my mother was 2, was 12. And so it would be very hard to have the kids, me and my brother, continue to learn Chinese in a meaningful way, right? Because you're away from your home country. And, learning to read and write can be very difficult. But one thing that they told us was that out of everything else, you have to continue to speak Cantonese at home. You have to anchor yourself to your culture. And so what my mom did was she taught us classical poems from Tang Dynasty when I was very little. We learned to recite it. And we learned the multiplication table in Chinese as well, in Cantonese as well. And if anyone here speaks Cantonese, you know that it's kind of like singing a song, and it helps you really remember it really quickly with multiplication tables. Um, and so that's how we kind of kept anchored to our culture, is speaking it at home and, learning these poems as well. And one of the things that was important to my mom was that, even though we weren't going to really learn how to write a lot of Chinese characters, the one thing that my parents were like, you have to learn how to write your Chinese name. Why? I'm sure all parents are like this, is that, you take a lot of time to, come up with a good name for your child. And in the Chinese culture, a lot of times our names are tied to, what our parents are hopes and aspirations for us. Sometimes it's also, to paint a very beautiful picture. And Chinese is, and so, parents like, we want you to know how to write it. So remember and, respect the culture you're in. And so that's one of the things we learned to do. We have to, if we forget any other Chinese character, we now have to learn how to write it. So eventually, we moved, well, sorry. Too much fun here. All right. Eventually, we moved to where's my letter? To Hawaii. So we moved to Hawaii when I was 8. That's when I started third grade. And I went to Ka'iolani Elementary School in Hawaii. And that was when I had my first little stint of being a so-called interpreter. Why? Because there was a new student that came from China. His name was Yang. And he was a very energetic kid. He'd actually run around a lot. And my teacher was like, hey, Alice, there's a new kid, a new student. Can you speak Chinese, right? So go and help me tell tell Young what's happening in class. And I'm like, okay. And so I tried to talk to Young and quickly realized, oh my gosh, he doesn't speak the same Chinese that I do. He speaks entirely something else. But enough that he understood me. And so, I try my best to work with him, right? As an 8-year-old and figure out, okay, how do I let him know what's happening in class, right? So that was my first kind of experience, right? And I think maybe some of us here have done this type of like ad hoc interpreting, maybe for our parents even, right? Or for a relative. And so, some of us started without really knowing it, that we were doing some sort of interpreting in our life. But at the same time, I think when I was able to help the teacher and help my classmate, it made me feel good. Even as an 8-year-old, it made me feel good. So in Hawaii, my parents still continue to have us, learn a few poems. But as an 8-year-old kid, you're like, I don't want to learn these things. It has nothing to do with my life here. I want to play with my friends, right? And so how did we keep up with this culture and our language? Well, I had great cousins in Hong Kong. Do you remember what VHS tapes are? Anybody know what that is? Okay, because I know I'm getting older, and I'm like, some people don't know what those things are. And so I had great cousins who um sent us recorded cartoons in Cantonese. So in Hong Kong, a lot of our cartoons are actually dubbed from Japan. They're Japanese animation. Japanese animation is still very popular now. And so cartoons like this, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, they were dubbed into Cantonese. And so that, as kids, oh my gosh, that just really grabbed our attention, right? And so we continue to watch these cartoons in this language, put that VH testing all the time. I think it was probably like scratch by the time we were in our teens. But this really kept us going, and our parents, speaking with us in Cantonese at home. What else is that? Music. Music is a big one, right? This is a very famous singer in Hong Kong. This is another one. And do you know what this is? It's a cassette tape. I'm sure you haven't seen this in a long time. And behind this cassette, in this box, for the cassette tape, behind this piece of this covering are lyrics. And so as a kid, I was like, I don't know all the characters, but I love to listen to the music and try to follow along, see what is there. And so as you can see, even as a little kid, I was drawn to language. So as still in Hawaii and I'm going into, my teens now, right? And then I feel a sense of, where do I belong? Right? I have this culture at home where I'm watching all these shows with my parents, right? On this one is music. Also, I'm still watching TV, Flintstones and everything, right, in English. But where do I belong? I feel like I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm not quite fully so-called, immersed in a Chinese culture, but also not quite fully in Hawaii or American culture either, right? I think a lot of immigrant children feel this way. And so many years later, I learned something called the third culture kid. Have you heard of this term? No? Yes? Yeah. So at first I heard of this term from a cousin, and I thought, oh, maybe it's like a new thing, like third culture kid. But actually, it's not a new term at all. It came up in the 1960s. So at first, it was really to describe children of expatriates. who aren't raised in the culture of their parents, but also not quite in the culture where they reside. So a lot of it might be like businessmen taking their families to the country, and their kids just kind of grow up, a little bit with their parents' culture and mostly within the culture that where they reside, and they have this space in between, right? So the kind of in between worlds not belong one to the other, and that's what a third culture kid is. And that when I heard of this term, I was like, that is exactly how I feel. I'm kind of in the middle. When I go home to Hong Kong, my relatives are like, Alice doesn't know any of these things, like, about our traditions and things. She grew up, in the States, right? But I do because my parents taught me these things, right? And it's hard to, let them know that, yeah, I am a part of your culture too. And so it was difficult growing up feeling this way. But when I became an interpreter, I realized one thing. It's actually a superpower. Why? Because as a medical interpreter, or probably any interpreter, besides just knowing the culture of of the country your parents are from, where you're from, and the culture where you reside, you also need to know about the health culture, right? The healthcare culture within the US. You have to be able to be comfortable navigating between these spaces. Because if you want to help your patients, you need to know that, right? Because it's not, because think about it, some of the patients come from different countries, and the way that their healthcare works is not the same as ours. One of the things I can share is uh, so a lot of my Chinese speaking patients can't teach online. When the doctor says, okay, we have three different treatments for you, A, B, and C. So what do you think? Which one would you like to start with? Sometimes the doctor in America, they want to include you in that conversation about your healthcare. But in China or in Hong Kong, that doesn't always happen. It's the doctor tells you what you're going to do. This is the treatment you're going to get, right? So it's more like the doctor is the soul. And so when they come here and they have the doctor ask them, they'll be like, what is the doctor asking me? Shouldn't they're the experts? Why are they asking me what kind of treatment I want to have, right? So that is the point as a medical interpreter, you will have to do, you have to explain that to explain to the doctor, hey, interpreter needs to pause conversation and explain why patient might be feeling a bit frustrated, by the option to just provide it. And so, those are the things that help you, even though maybe you struggled as a kid, I did, but you realize, hey, actually, this is helpful. To be a third culture kid, to know that, okay, I can help this patient navigate, right? And also help the provider navigate as well, right, as they're talking with the patients. So, continuing on my journey. So far, as you can tell, my story not is actually not too similar to my peers. My peers, my colleagues back home, they probably all came here when they were much older than I was. So their command of like the target language, maybe it's Spanish, maybe it's Cantonese, maybe it's Vietnamese, it's much stronger, right? And so they learn maybe English later on in life. But for me, I'm a little bit of the opposite. I grew up with both these languages kind of at the same time, being English as my stronger language because I go to school, right? It's learning English. My friends all speak English. It's only at home and I like in that environment. Um, and so at this point, I'm still thinking, still feel like I don't know where I should be. So when I went to university, I decided to continue my journey of learning about my culture and who I am by studying Asian studies. Um, actually, I missed the part here. I missed the part here. To backtrack a little bit. So before I went to university, I was still in my high school years, actually before high school, intermediate school. When you go to before you go to high school, or when you go to high school, you need to learn a second language, right? A lot of us need to learn it. A lot of my friends, they picked Spanish, right? Or they picked Japanese. Japanese is a huge one. For me, I was like, I still want to learn more about me and the language that I speak. And Cantonese, isn't a language you can learn easily here. Boy. But I wanted to, watching all these movies and things like, as any teenager, you want to learn about the gossip too, about that celebrity and this actor, right? And so I couldn't read anything in Chinese, right? And those newspapers and magazines, it's like, I can't read anything. I want to know. And so I thought, how can I do this? I'm already like 14, 13. So, well, I do want to learn how to do this. So one day, and we're in Chinatown having dim sum at a restaurant. But what motivated me was there was a girl across the way on another table around my age. She's reading a newspaper. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is what I need to do. I need to do what she's doing. And so I told my parents I want to learn how to read and write better. And so I was like, well, I have to find a public high school that can teach me. And at the time, Mandarin is the only language that is taught. And so learning Mandarin was really a way, and so means to learn how to read and write. Now, anybody know which high school actually teaches Mandarin as a second language in Hawaii? Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, in high school or
high school.
McKinley. Also Roosevelt.
Oh, Roosevelt now? Oh, perfect. Yeah. So when I was doing, it was only McKinley, I think. And so I had to go out of my district to ask for permission to go to McKinley High School. And I remember very clearly I had to go see the principal and state my case. And then they accepted it, but again, I kind of like a stereotype. The principal said, okay, you can come to our high school and do your studies in Mandarin. That's fine. But you have to join our math club. That's stereotypical, oh, all Asians are really good at math. I did not say anything because guess what? I am not one of those. I am not good at math. But I just nodded so that I can, get to my goal, which is to learn Mandarin. And so that's what I did. I learned Mandarin in high school. I learned to read and write. I learned to read and write in traditional characters. So we have for Mandarin, we have traditional Chinese characters and we have simplified Chinese characters. At the time, my teachers were all, I think, from Taiwan, so it was all traditional Chinese characters. And so that's actually where I started to, learn how to speak Mandarin and then learn how to read and write better. Because I knew some characters already, right, from my mom having us recite those poems. But hey, you're a kid, forget these things. But so I had a little bit of foundation at the time, but not enough. So learning in high school really gave me that foundation to do that. So now let's fast forward now. University. I continued to learn Mandarin. I took Asian studies and I received a certificate in Chinese. But as any, university student, there's a point in your life where you're like, what am I going to do with what I'm learning at university? How do I apply what I learned, right? Especially for me, Asian studies, it's so broad. What am I going to do? So I thought back to, the time that I helped my classmate in elementary school. Naturally, I also had a classmate in high school, and this classmate actually came from Hong Kong. And the thing was, in Hong Kong, you are taught English and Chinese, Cantonese at the same time. So why would this high school student need my help? Well, even though they learn uh, English in school, it's very limited, right? Because you're only in that environment in school. So their reading comprehension is really good in English, but the practice, right? Practice of the skills to speak, not so great. And so I had to help this classmate figure out, what is the equivalent for the high school here and the high school that what are the classes you already took, what classes they used to take. So that also gave me a sense of, oh yeah, great, I can help I can help this student, I can help this counselor figure out all these things. So I thought about, well, those are really great. And every time I did those, it made me feel really good. It's very important knowing that I can use my language skills. And also, my mom was another inspiration. She worked at the Red Cross in Hong Kong. And so she told me a lot of stories about how do you help those who are in need, right? Actually, let me share this with you. When I was little, I wanted to be a nurse. I wanted to be a nurse, and I was afraid of hospitals. But then, remembering those, the inspiration of my mom, my love for language and helping people, I thought, you know what, maybe interpreting is what I want to do. And so what did I do? When I went to university, I took translation and interpreting courses. And that really helped me build my foundation for what is kind of be a little bit of a budding career in. So first of all, in what fields can you find interpreters? So today we're talking about community interpreter, right? So in the community, where in the community can we find interpreters? So I'm a healthcare, right, interpreter, medical interpreter. Where else can we find interpreters? Any guesses? Any thoughts?
Words. Or what is it? Tourism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tourism. Anyone else? Someone else is it? Right. So in the community, we have healthcare. We also have social services, legal, and also in education, right? Those are our community interpreters. So social services can also be at a hospital, in someone's home, at a community center. Uh, and they also have entertainment and sports, right? So kind of close to tourism. We also have an emphasis on IT. Conferences, like the UN is a big one, right? We have interpreters, we have many interpreters there. And then also have for diplomacy and government, right? And so conferences is where at the UN, you see everybody with their headset, the interpreters with their headset, right? And usually you have to, not usually do, have to have a partner with you when you do conference interpreting with your headset simultaneous. It's called simultaneous interpreting. So as the speaker is talking, you are interpreting at a live of one or live of two, meaning once they start speaking to maybe about 2 seconds, you have to start interpreting. And so you need a partner to do that because you can only pretty much concentrate about 30 minutes when you do simultaneous interpreting. So you need a partner to switch off so that you can kind of take a rest, but you're not totally like, going to bed or anything or taking a nap. You actually have to pay attention to your partner to make sure that, they're okay. And that, usually when you're at a conference like this, you have a lot of documents that you have to prepare for and, for this conference. And so you have to make sure that, you might have to pass some things to your partner to make sure that they're getting the information. So it's a lot of work. That is like, so that's conference. Now, interpreters, you don't really hear about us. You don't hear about us very much, right? Because usually if we do our jobs right, you won't hear about us because we're doing our jobs right, meaning we are helping two different parties communicate almost seamlessly. So in a way, we're almost invisible, right? Because if these two parties can talk to each other through the interpreter, then it should be just looks like these two people are, right? And so you don't hear about us. We're almost invisible. But sometimes you do hear about us in the news. So anybody can think of any interpreter being in the news kind of in the last year or so? Mm-hmm. A baseball player? That's a hint. Shohei Ohtani? His interpreter was on the news. Oh. Not for a good reason, right? Not for a good reason. He did some, gambling fraud or something. So you don't want to be in the news, but that happens. Now, another one is do you remember in 2013 what happened at the Nelson Mandela's Memorial? No? Okay. So all the world leaders are there, and Obama's on the stage, and there's a picture of Obama on the stage, of President Obama on the stage, with a sign language interpreter who was actually doing fake sign language. Oh my God. It was a big deal. The deaf community was livid because this is on a national stage, right? With all these world leaders, and we have a sign language interpreter who's not qualified to be there, right? And that's it's Nelson Mandela. It's a memorial to him. it was a very big deal. And so there's a lot of like, that's why we need to have qualified interpreters to do the work, to vet those interpreters and make sure they are doing the work.
Yeah, they're always on the news, yeah, the sign language.
Yes, they are. Yes, yes, yes. There is usually, especially in like some sort of natural disaster, you see them either standing next to the podium where the governor and the mayor is speaking, right? And sometimes they're also on a little box. You can see them. Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So those are not good. Now, but there are some good ones too. So back in 2021, there was a summit in Alaska, the US. The US China summit in Alaska. Okay. I'm not sure if you guys heard about either. But I guess interpreters would kind of, for some reason, look for these things or just attracts us. So at this summit in Alaska, there was a diplomat from China uh, who went on to speak for 16 minutes without stopping. You have interpreters on both sides. Without stopping, 16 minutes. That's a very long time. Usually in a summit, unlike at a conference where it's simultaneous interpreting, at a conference, usually, or at a summit, you usually have what we call consecutive interpreting, where the speaker speaks for maybe a few sentences and then pause, the interpreter interprets, and it continues in that rhythm. If this person spoke for 16 minutes, that's really long. And after he spoke for that time, he turned to his colleague and said, do you have anything else to add? And this is where the interpreter did a great job. She interjected and says, interpreter needs to interpret. And then that's when he realized, oh yeah, sorry, I talked for so long. Everybody recognized it. Even the US side says, yeah, I think you better give her a raise because this is going to be difficult to interpret for 6 minutes, to interpret what you just said for 16 minutes. But she did a phenomenal job. She probably took really great notes. And it went viral on the internet. I guess for people like me who are interpreters, like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. So there are good things that, the showing that, the skills of the interpreter be able to do that. What I found interesting was that the person who spoke for 16 minutes, he used to be an interpreter. And so, even interpreters make mistakes. He should have known to kind of stop, right? To pause, to give his interpreter time to interpret. Yeah. All right. So continue right along on my journey. I finished now. I have, graduated from university and I wanted to continue to study. What did I do? I went to Beijing. I went to Peking University and I continued to do my studies there. This was the test. This was a test of my Mandarin skills. I learned it for at least 10 years by then. And I was very confident until I got to Beijing. And I realized I cannot seem to understand the word anybody is saying. Why? Everybody has a different accent. Everybody comes from different parts of China, right? And so the professors there also have their accents, right? Now, when I learned Mandarin in a school environment and classroom, all your teachers are going to speak standard Mandarin very clearly to you, right? But when you're there in China, no one's going to do that. Everybody's going to speak the way they speak. And so I had such a hard time understanding what was going on. Being immersed in that was really hard. But I had to trust my skills, right? And so I had to make myself uh, go out and talk to people. Now, if you're going to a grocery store, you don't have to talk to anybody. You grab your groceries, you pay, and you go home, right? But how do I actually interact with people in the community, right? In Beijing. So I had to force myself to do this. I'm a very shy person. Right now, I know I'm doing this presentation with you, but I'm probably very nervous at the time. So what did I do? There was this one time, actually before that, trying to kind of make myself understand what people were saying. I went back to what I did when I was a kid. You watch TV. right? You turn on the television, you might have some news, some whatever program. As then I'm doing my chores, cooking, I'm listening, because I felt everybody was talking so fast when I was, when I first got to Beijing. And as I kept doing that every day from school, I come home and I do this. And some reason it felt like they were slowing down. I felt like, oh my gosh, I think I caught that sentence that they just said in the news. And the news is the hardest one, the hardest one to understand. Like, drama programs, variety shows, those are fun, right? But news is one of the hardest things to understand. So I was like, oh my gosh, I caught it. And so slowly doing that practice every day helped me feel like, okay, now I can, my listening skills are better, right? Now I had to practice like speaking to someone, not being nervous about it. And so in my building at the time, there's an elevator lady. You don't press your own buttons. An elevator lady presses it for you. You tell them which number and to press it for you. She was always very cold. I felt like she was very cold and like upset. So I was afraid to talk to her anyway. Even when I was like good morning, she would, not say anything. Anyway, and so one day the light bulb in my apartment went out. And I was like, oh my gosh, now I do need to talk to that lady because she's the one who finds like the maintenance person. I was like, okay. I had to like calm myself down. I says, we have to do this, Alice. Just have to take that first step. So I did. I I wrote down what I was gonna say. And then I went out and I talked to her. And then she nodded. And then she told me, okay, someone's gonna come and help you. And then like that opened me up to say, I am confident enough to do this and I can do this, right? To talk to someone, to the maintenance person. And that really helped me understand, okay, you do know your stuff, but you need to practice it and practice it. And so that's what I did. And through being in Beijing, I got an interpreting job, not interpreting, tutoring job. I was tutoring Olympic athletes in English. And that's where it got me to my first interpreting job. And anybody can guess on the screen what is my first interpreting job? Anybody? Sports, yay! Yes, sports. So I had the opportunity to take a nine ball player, a nine ball athlete. Actually, anybody know what nine ball is? You do? Okay. Yes. The pool game. Yes. Yep, it's a pool game. So it's the kind of race to nine, meaning like the first person to put the nine ball in wins the game. And so this athlete that I met, she was at the time she was world ranking in the top five or something like that, top three maybe. Um, and so my job was to be her interpreter, to take her to the US, um, to go to these different tournaments and be her manager and organize all her travel. And also be her English teacher too. So it was a lot of hats I was wearing, right? And I was traveling with her to the US and had helping her talk to the organizers, right? To interpret for her when she has to talk to the organizers. And the one thing that I remember from this is that because she is already world ranking, but the US doesn't recognize that. In the US, if you play nine ball or this was, you have to work from your way up. So way up meaning up to the nationals. So what we had to do, we had to go into this little itty bitty towns. The first one we went to was in Texas. And I was so scared. Why? She's world ranking and she's playing a pool hall with people who are amateurs. But she has to start the same way they do. Go through these steps, right, to get to nationals. So every time she played, she blew everybody out of the water. And I was like, oh my gosh, people think we're hustling. They probably think we're just here to hustle. And we're in very small towns, right? In Texas, in Florida. But thankfully, the people in this circle are very small and they're very friendly. And once they hear her name, they knew her. Oh my gosh, it's so and so. Oh my goodness, So they kind of knew already, right? But when you're practicing pool calls, people were watching, thinking, wow, this girl, she's amazing, right? So, but I soon realized that interpreting for her at these events, while it was exciting at the time, It's very taxing. And I realized, you know what? It's not the right fit for me. There's a lot of traveling. Every 2 weeks we'll be going somewhere else. And so I realized, you know what? This type of interpreting is fun. Maybe that's not what I want to do. So my next my next interpreting job was in technology. Very short gig. It was a Singapore university wanted to bring their students over to go to Silicon Valley, to California, to learn about semiconductors and all these things, right? And I was like, okay, let me try this one out. So as an interpreter, you have to really do your homework. You have to study all the terminology in the field that you're going to do, right? And so I asked the university, okay, so what are things I need to learn? You know, what companies are going to, right? And so I did my homework. I studied hard. They come over, and most of them are actually professionals. They're actually business people, and they're entrepreneurs. And we come to they come to California, and everything they were talking about was nothing that I studied. It was very hard. It was very tough trying to interpret something that, oh my gosh, I thought I got it down, and now you're talking about something else. Because it was just a very organic conversation, and it got to things that I was like, oh my gosh, that was good. So I realized, you know what? Maybe business and technology. I don't want to learn more about STEM. Maybe that's not for me. Around the same time, I was doing this short job with the Singapore University. A good friend of mine that I met in Beijing, who's actually from California, from San Francisco, called me and said, "Hey, how are you doing, Alice? Guess what? I have a job in I just got a job in medical interpreting at UCSF." And she told me all about it. And that's when kind of a light bulb came on. And I was like, oh my gosh, maybe this is what I want to do. Because I love helping people. I love my language, right? And inspired by my mom. And what better to do it at a hospital, to work at a hospital? I'm afraid of a hospital, but I think I get over my fear because I want to help people. And so that's when I went to healthcare. This, with healthcare interpreting, actually, I moved to California because my language barrier is Cantonese, right? And also Mandarin. And it's here at that time in Hawaii, I couldn't find a way to do that here. And I was like, where do I find this opportunity? So I went to California and I studied medical terminology. I studied at a college, at a city college. I studied medical terminology. I studied transcription, medical transcription. And then so studying the medical terms is really all in English. Everything's in English, right? So I had to self-study, look terms up on the internet, right? And cross-reference and make sure the terms in Chinese is actually what it is. And then also, um, and then when I got the English Chinese medical dictionary, that was gold. That medical dictionary was gold. But before that, I had to do a lot of self-study to learn these terms in Chinese. And then I applied to UCSF for a medical interpreter. I had and I had to take there was a phone interview. They test your language skills through that preliminary phone interview, right? Very simple medical terms. By then I was okay with medical terms because I was studying at the city college, right? And then for the actual interview, they gave you a 2-hour intense language and competency test. That was hard. You have to learn how to you have to translate. They give you a paragraph, yeah, in English, and you translate it into you could write it either in traditional or simpler characters if you like, and a lot of consecutive interpreting practice, tests. And it was long and grueling, but I passed. And I'm working at UCSF, and I had a very good mentor, so I shadowed her. She became a good friend afterwards. And, you learn a lot on the job, right? You learn a lot on the job. And there's always going to be, in medical interpreting, there's always going to be, you're always going to encounter things that are very routine. Go to your family doctor, right? But you also encounter things that are very sad, difficult. conversations. But you also have some things that are, not, it seems like a dire situation, but hey, things work out, right? So you have a lot of different uh, patients that you encounter. And I realized that, working at the health at the hospital was where I fit. This is where I fit. And I become very passionate about being a medical interpreter. I still am, even though I'm a business manager. If I have a chance to interpret, go out to interpret because all my interpreters are busy. It's like the best thing of the day is to go out and interpret because you have that connection with the patient and the provider. And trust me, if you go to these appointments long enough, patients will recognize you and say, "Oh my gosh, where have you been? I haven't seen you for so long." It's because you gave them a great experience, that you were able to help them, in their time of need. Think about it. As interpreters, medical interpreters, you are in that space for them for maybe 20 minutes. With those 20 minutes, it's a very intimate 20 minutes. You're learning about their health that maybe none of their family knows about, right? And you have to keep this confidential. At the same time, you're the person who's communicating, you know, what the doctor is saying to them about their health so that they can make informed decisions, right, about what they want to do. And think about it, it can be life or death, right? Because it's your body, it's your health. And if you don't understand it, what's going on, it could be detrimental. So having an interpreter there to help the patient understand what's going on and help the provider understand what the patient's needs are, it's very important. And you're there for those 20 minutes, sometimes you're gonna, and it's amazing that you're able to do that for that patient, no matter the outcome, right? No matter what the decision is, you help that patient understand what it is so that they can make the right decision for themselves. And I realized that it's very rewarding to go to help people, I think, right? All right. So we're gonna watch a little clip. We're gonna watch a little clip. This little clip is tied to, if you guys take nothing away from today, there are two things I want you guys to learn. And so this clip I'm going to show is from a movie called The Covenant. Did you guys heard of that? Yeah, some people nodded. I see, maybe not everybody. So this movie is about, okay, this person here, his name is Ahmed. He's an interpreter. This guy, you know who that is, right? Yeah. So his name is John Kinley in this movie, and he's a master sergeant. This takes place, I think, in Afghanistan. So Ahmed is John Kinley's new interpreter. And they're going through some roads, and the interpreter is saying, you know what, I have some, I want to share my thoughts about this. And let's watch.
Arrowverse is your all-access pass to thrilling aviation content. No ads, just pure aviation action. All for only $6.99 a month.
Sergeant Kelly, can you please stop the vehicle? Excuse me? I need to speak to you, Sergeant. We don't stop the vehicles, we keep moving. I think we have a problem. Please stop the vehicle, Sergeant. Stop the truck, Jesse.
All vehicles for a tactical stop.
What is it, Ahmed?
Something's wrong. There's no logical reason for Hadi to lead us down this route.
Let's show you.
Let's what?
Marry as a
Unless he's leading us into a trap.
as a commercial on
Well, that's a pretty big
Mary.
Deduction, not
Mary
a
who?
Now you teaching me English?
I've been thinking about all the possible reasons why he'd take this route. All the answers smell bad. He lied about the road being washed out. The rainfalls didn't affect this area.
Hadi's been vetted.
You can say whatever you want, Sergeant. We just don't want to go down this road.
You're out of your bounds, Ahmed.
You're here to translate.
Actually, I'm here to interpret.
So what is my lesson here? All right. So again, you take nothing away from today. I hope you learn these two things. Interpreter versus translator. Anybody know the difference? So an interpreter is an individual who orally interprets from one language into another. That's an interpreter. A translator is an individual who translates written material from one language into another. So these are two different professions, actually. But in the news, we see they kind of interchange these terms. A lot of time you hear the word translator, right? But actually, they're two different things, two different professions. And here are some more the differences between the two. So interpreter interprets from source language into target in real time. You have to have strong speaking and listening skills. And you have to manage the flow of the visit. What does that mean, manage the flow of the visit? What that means is that when you're with your patient and your provider, you have to make sure they're not speaking over each other. You have to make sure there's a good rhythm, meaning the provider speaks a few, 2 or 3, 4 sentences and pauses so that you could interpret and the patient can understand and the patient can respond, you interpret, and so there's a rhythm to it, right? There's a way and you have to maintain that rhythm. Because sometimes what happens is maybe you have an interpreter who understands Cantonese, but they don't speak it well, right? So before you even interpret, they're already asking something else. But your job as an interpreter, you have to interpret everything that is said in the room. That's one of the golden rules in medical interpreting. So you have to know how to manage that flow. When I say everything is interpreted, is everything. So if you have, maybe it's a family meeting where you have 5 doctors, right, and the family there, or just the patient. If in that team of providers is like 2 people talking, right, just talking amongst themselves within that room, I have to interpret what they're talking about. And why? Anybody know why? Okay. So even though the patient is, only one provider is talking, but there's chatter going over here, the patient doesn't know if the chatter going over there is about them or not, right? Now think about it. For us who speak English, if we go to the doctor and then maybe there's a bunch of other people on the side and they're chatting, you're focused on that one provider, right? Talking to you in English. And you're like, okay, everything's fine. Unconsciously, you could probably hear something going on over there, but because they're speaking English and you speak English, you know that this is who I'm talking about me. So I'm just gonna focus here, right? You know that. But for a patient with LEP, which is limited English proficiency, they don't know that, right? They're just concentrating what the interpreter is interpreting back to them from this one provider. But all the chatter over there, they'll be thinking like, is that talking about me? They might get uncomfortable. So that's why everything that is said in the room needs to be interpreted. That's equity, right? So, that's part of managing the flow. If you have folks talking, you have to say either, I have to interpret what you're saying. And, and sometimes you have to do what's called pre-session, telling folks, I have to interpret everything that is said in the room, meaning that if you have any side conversations, please go outside, that is not pertaining to that patient. Or else I have to interpret it, right? Maybe you talk about, what are we gonna have for lunch later? I have to interpret that, and that's not professional, is it? So that is one of the golden rules. You have to interpret everything that happens, even if it's from the family side, right? I still have to interpret that to the provider. Okay, so translator is translate written materials from source language into target language. They have to have strong writing skills from source to target. And also they have to have good research skills too. Research because sometimes you have to cross-reference. You can't rely on Wikipedia, right? You have to do your research, right? Do your due diligence when you do translations. Interpreters actually also do some research work, but ours is always on the fly. We might want to make sure, okay, I'm going into a family meeting. Let me look up as a staff interpreter, right? I'm working at a hospital. I'm an employee, so I can go and look into the medical record and say, okay, they're going to talk about these diagnoses. Okay, that one I'm not too familiar with. Let me go look it up, right? So that's how you prepare, right? For those encounters. So we do some research, but usually it's kind of on the fly, right? So a bonus basic. Use versus work with. I need to use an interpreter. Can I order one? Did you use an interpreter? The doctor used an interpreter today. Yay. Okay. You see anything wrong with the way these sentences? What's wrong with them? Hmm?
Use the word use.
Exactly. We're not tools. We're not a tool to be used. We're a people, right? We're a profession. We don't say, oh yeah, let's go use the social worker. Let's go use the nurse, right? No. We are medical interpreters. We're part of the care team, right? And that's very important. It's important for us to use the right language for ourselves and to educate our colleagues in the medical field to use the right terms too. Because we're people. We're not from a vending machine. We're not a tool, right? The doctor uses a scalpel, right? A doctor works with an interpreter, right? I think this is when I started as an interpreter, a medical interpreter, I didn't know this. I was like, okay, yeah, they need me over there. Okay. Until a friend of mine, the same friend who told me about UCSF, medical interpreting, she was like, no, Alice, we're not tools. We're people. We're a profession. We need to also feel that way too by using the right language. So what are the basics again? What's an interpreter? What do they do? Orally. And a translator? Written, yes. And we work with an interpreter, right? Okay. So there might be a quiz at the end. So remember that. All right. All right. Okay. Next is, so why do we need language access? First of all, it is the right thing to do, right? Also, imagine if you're in a country and you don't know the language and you're trying to find help, right? That's going to be very difficult. And that is what our patients with LOP go through every day, right? Even in their daily lives, maybe in their daily lives, they can get by, like my mom, she can use her daily English to get by, talk to her neighbors, right, her friends. But when you're in a medical setting, that's a whole different culture. It's a whole set of language skills that my mom doesn't have. She needs an interpreter, when she goes to see the doctor. And guess what? I can't interpret for her. Did you know that? As a medical interpreter, I cannot. See, I see someone over there, she's shaking her head. That's right. You cannot interpret for your family. Why? Because you have too much emotional investment into that, right? And you will make mistakes. You will have bias. Even if you say you won't, you will, right? Because that's your family. And so that's why as a medical interpreter, I cannot interpret for my family. Except for maybe like in a very dire situation where there's no interpreters available, right? And you just have to do it. I've done it, but it's hard. And you just really have to focus, okay, this is not my mom right at this moment, but it's hard. So that's why, in order to not have that bias, medical interpreters do not interpret for their family as best you can. Okay. So the next video is going to show what is it like for, if you don't understand the language, right? What is our patient with LMP go through? It's a little bit traumatic, but I think it drives the point. This was a public announcement by, it's the Translation Association from Texas. And it's about 14 years ago. And they created this video.
Doctor on Tio. Tandoro.
Excuse me, sir. I'm so sorry. She's been crying nonstop. She has a temperature of 105. I don't know what to do.
Maravidig. Bipolarless
No,
Lasant.
please, just every time I feed her, she throws up. I don't know.
Bipolarless
I don't understand what you're
Lasant.
saying. What are you saying? Can you just look at her? No, she's burning up. Just feel.
Bipolarless La Anglan.
No, what?
She's
She's burning up. Feel her head.
Tranquilli, Kananche. The Monday is Askan.
What is he doing?
Do you have?
My baby, she's got a temperature of 105. Every time I feed her, she throws up. Please, can you? She's burning up. Feel her head.
Moravidig.
Please, just feel her head. Feel her head. Just someone let me in to see the doctor. No, does anyone understand what I'm saying? Please, someone help me.
8% of U.S. citizens speak limited English. For these 25 million Americans, professional interpreters can mean the difference between life and death.
That was a little bit heavy, but it drives the point that, our patients with OT do need that help because they can't understand what's happening to them. And without an interpreter, they're lost. By the way, anybody catch the language that was spoken by all the other folks in the video?
It sounded Latin.
It sounded Latin, okay.
I don't know.
Okay, anyone else? No?
Italian.
It sounded Italian. Okay. So it's called Esperanto. Anybody heard of that? No. So Esperanto was created or developed in 1887. It was supposed to be the international language of the world. They wanted everyone to speak this language. And you're right, it's a little Italian and Latin because it was a mix of different European languages. And they're trying to use that as the language that everybody is going to speak. But of course, that didn't happen. But yeah, so that was the language they used for this video, just to drive that point. What happens when you don't understand the language. Yeah. So, like I said, why do we provide language access? First of all, it's the right thing to do, but there's also laws and regulations that guide this. So the first one is Title VI Civil Rights Act of 1964. So it says, it prohibits against exclusion from participation in, denial of benefits of, and discrimination under federally assisted programs on ground of race, color, or national origin. And language falls under national origin. But if I remember correctly, I think language didn't fall into national origins until like in the 80s. So that's why it's been taking like interpreters with the community for so long to actually develop a test and make all these, put all these actually implement what was put in here. And so, let's see. So that really means that any program that receives federal assistance, federal financial assistance, need to provide service, and for language access. So this kind of speaks it a little bit more. So Title VI of Civil Rights Act of 1964 requires recipients of federal financial assistance to take reasonable steps to make their programs, services, and activities accessible by eligible persons with limited English. Reasonable steps meaning you provide interpreters. You have to have things posted. Tells you that language access is provided here, is available. And then we also have the American with Disabilities Act, the ADA. Why does this play a role? Because it's sign language, right? We have the deaf community, and this is where they fall. So there's also a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in everyday activities. And so, and these are the areas where we have to provide service. We cannot discriminate. So again, with the ADA, we have to provide interpreters, sign language, or tactile. Real-time captioning. So real-time captioning, I think nowadays, you know, at least in my household, we've always watched TV with caption. It helps with learning English. My dad is not proficient, wasn't very proficient in English when he first came in. But, you know, watching TV with captions, it really helps, you know, we learn the culture as well. But for, with ADA, real-time captioning is someone typing as they're talking or as the provider's talking. And then you have TRS, Communication Relay Service, so it's free. And then also Video Relay Service, which is also free as well. So with these services, I think the deaf person calls and then calls the relay service, and the relay service calls the hearing person, and then they do a relay so that a deaf person can communicate on the phones. The video is the same, but it's just in the video form. And video remote interpreting is fee-based. So this is what a lot of hospitals use. Like UCSF, we call it the BMI, but the same thing. Basically, it's on a video on an iPad, or it could be on a computer. It has to, there are criteria for this, for video, because if you provide this, it has to be that you have a fast enough bandwidth to have clear pictures and clear sound. If you do not, that is not meaningful access. So, if you provide the service, you have to make sure that the system works well. There's also Affordable Care Act of Section 1557. There was a final ruling on it last year. And it's a non-discrimination law in the Affordable Care Act. It already builds on these existing laws, and none of them we've talked about. And it's also the first civil rights law that prohibits sex discrimination in healthcare, including the following: sexual orientation, gender identity, including transgender individuals, sex stereotype, and sexual characteristics, including intersex individuals. And so 1557, it applies to almost everywhere if you read this, right? All the healthcare areas, any health programs that receive federal funding needs to provide the service. And again, it really means that you need to take reasonable steps to provide meaningful language access to individuals with limited English proficiency. It must be free of charge. And you have to post signage in the hospitals about the accessibility of language access. So if you walk into a hospital, usually you'll see patients' rights and responsibilities. That has to be posted. And along there, it should be in different languages as well. And at UCSF, we have it in four languages, four languages, where we have it in English, we have it in Russian, we have it in Chinese, and we have it in Spanish. We have to have posted in the hospital. And alongside that, we need to have another sign that says that, language access is available, interpreting services available in those in non-English languages. So we have them in Spanish, we have it in Chinese, we have it in Russian as well, that, you can access interpreting services. This is important. You cannot rely on a minor to interpret. Okay, except when there's, again, some sort of life-threatening issue and there's no interpreter available, you could do that. But part of Section 57 is you cannot rely on minor children to do interpreting. So think about, a child interpreting for their mom at at a gynecology book. That's crazy, right? That's not something we should do. A child should not be interpreting for their parents. In the final ruling of 1557, they also put back these important definitions of what a qualified interpreter and translator, what kind of work they do. So they must be proficient in speaking and writing for the translator, understand English, and at least one other spoken language. But if you're doing a relay, then you need to know 2 non-English language. So what is a relay? Anybody know relay interpreters? No? Okay. Relay interpreter, like it says here, 2 non-English languages for relay interpreter. So you have a Spanish, let's say you have a Spanish interpreter, medical interpreter, and you have an interpreter of Spanish and another indigenous language. In the Bay Area, in San Francisco, MAM, M-A-M, it's indigenous language from Guatemala. And a lot of folks actually, there's a big community, but not enough interpreters for that language. So what happens is sometimes you have an interpreter who interprets MAM and Spanish, but they don't interpret English. So you have to have a relay, meaning you have to have this interpreter and also a Spanish interpreter, like Spanish to English. So you do a relay that way, right? So patient speaks MAM, the MAM interpreter interprets into Spanish, and then the Spanish interpreter interprets it into English. That's a relay interpreter. And so you have to interpret accurately, effectively, impartially. So impartiality is very important, right? That's why we don't interpret for our family. One of the reasons. And you use the special language. So for us as medical interpreting, right? Medical terminology, you don't add, you don't change anything, you don't do additions when you interpret. Now, doesn't mean that, there's never going to be always going to be one-to-one in translations, right? Because it's a different language, but you have to find the same way to interpret what we just heard into that target language with the same meaning and context. And the same tone, sentiment, and all that. So in a way, like interpreters become like actors, you think about it, right? You have to act in the role of a patient, and then you have to role of a provider, right? And also they adhere to generally accepted ethics, and everything is confidential. Now, machine translation is also part of 1557. So machine translation is automated translation that exists as text-based and provides instant translation into various languages. Google Translate is a big one, right? ChatGPT, all this AI that's happening. But if you do use this, you need to have a human qualified translator to review the work. Okay? I'm sure some of you who have used Google Translate, and I'm sure everybody, right? Everybody uses Google Translate, yeah. Okay. Yep. The reason you need to have a human translator to look at it is because they don't always translate correctly. And if you don't know the language, you don't know there's an issue, right? And it could be very serious. Let me show you some real life examples. This is a patient instructions, discharge instructions, okay? This is the English part. I know this is very small. It says, this is the part, the highlighted here is equal to this. Inability to drink enough water, drink enough to urinate at least 4 times daily, okay? That's one of the reasons you need to call your primary care. Now, this is translated into, interesting enough, into Cantonese, but anybody who's a Chinese interpreter here? Okay, so Cantonese, this is, if you can read it, this is colloquial. This is spoken. The way we speak is not the way we write, right? And so that's already one issue that I have when I saw this. Someone sent this to us and says, oh, can you review this for us? I'm like, okay, that's one thing that I saw was wrong, which is okay. We can tweak it, work with it. Formatting is a little bit off, right? You see 100, the fever greater than 100, and point 4. It should be one of the points, but it's not. Now, the biggest issue is this one. Here, let me show you what it actually says. Oh. Oh. This was machine translation. This became a big, we had to do an investigation on this. We had to submit an incident report and see what happened. Like, who did this? You know, because one of the policies that USES said is we do not use machine translation. We tell them to refrain from doing that because this can happen. And if you do not know the target language, the language is being translated into, this actually went out. Oh, this actually went out. That's why you have to do an investigation. Yeah. So, pitfalls. Another one. This one was about clocking in and out, dodging in and out, okay? So in English, you have no missing punches, meaning great, you didn't miss clocking in, right? Perfect, great employee. Now, in the Chinese, can you see that? What does it say? Literal punches. Literal punches, right? Yeah, you didn't miss any punch, like physically, which is great. I didn't get hit, but this is not what they're talking about. It's a context, right? AI may not know your context. You can teach it, right? Google Translate, they just put it in. I thought, okay, I think this might be fine. Okay, Alice and team, please check it. And we're like, no, this is not fine. Without context, this is that person missed the physical punch, right? So yeah, but I also want to say that these are things that go wrong with machine translation. But as a translator, these are actually great tools, right? Because if you're a translator, you know both languages. Let's say you translated something, we call it back translate. You put it back into Google, right? Where you translate it to see what it spits out in English, right? So we have to embrace these new tools, right? AI is not going to go away. Machine translation, large language models are not going to go away. So how do we, as interpreters, embrace it? We have to learn how to use it, right? And even though we tell our providers not to use it because they're not, translators are not bilingual. They may not know how to read it. Maybe they are bilingual, but they don't know how to read and write. So this is dangerous, if it's not used properly, right? So, but as translators and interpreters, you can use it because you know both languages. You are able to differentiate, right? Oh, this is terrible. Like, I can't use this, right? Let's try something else. So remember, what do we need to do? We use machine translation. You check it. You have to have human eyes to check it. Yeah. All right. So national class standards is the next one. So what is national class standards? It's cultural and linguistically appropriate services class. So this actually, all these laws and regulations about language access, this is a guide for healthcare institutions like where I work to know how to implement language access, how to implement all these things. There are 15 standards. There are 4 themes. And I'm going to go really quickly. Is principal standards. So for UCSF, we have to have policies around language access. How do you provide it? How do you request a service? If a patient asks for it or a provider requests it, how does this happen? We have to have policies and regulations, even within the hospital, to implement it. And you have to, the leadership and the workforce, you need to hire folks who understand the linguistic and cultural needs of the patients in your service area, right? So that they know how to implement these things. Communication and language access, again, it has to be free, right? You have to post those services that you have these services available in those languages too. And also engagement, continuous improvement, and accountability. So what does that mean? That means at the hospital, just because you have a policy, yep, I'm done, I checked off that box. yep, I put up those signs, but there's always something that you have to improve on, right? To make sure that language access is provided, right? How do you regulate that? So one of the things that we implemented at UCSF is something called a hard stop. What is a hard stop? Okay, so a provider, after they see a patient with maybe speaks Spanish, right? They have to actually document it in their notes that I worked with an interpreter. And the interpreter, maybe it's a vendor interpreter, right? So the ID number, or maybe a name. Maybe it was one of my colleagues, maybe Michelle. Okay, Dr. Michelle. Now, not all providers do this, but the thing is, the Joint Commission needs to see this. So they'll ask you, hey, UCSF, you said that you provided service for this patient who speaks Spanish. Where's your documentation that you actually did provide an interpreter? So Joint Commission want to know. You might get dinged if you can't show that documentation. So how do we make it more convenient? Convenient because providers always say, I'm so busy, I can't do more than what I do. So we implemented a hard stop. Basically, it means when they close out the document, their note for that patient, a screen pops up and says, hey, how did you provide language access to this patient? You have to check out the box. I worked with maybe an in-person interpreter, a video, or a phone. You have to check off one of those. Oh, maybe you are bilingual. We have a program called Certified Bilingual Providers, meaning that after they take a test, they can provide care directly to their patient in that preferred language without the assistance of an interpreter. There is such a program for us at UCSF. So they can check out, okay, I'm a bilingual, certified bilingual. Okay. So what does this do? This helps us make sure that we are providing services, right? There's documentation that we're providing services to our LP patients. And so when we first started the hard stop, our baseline was 66%. Only 66% of the providers were doing documentation, saying that I worked with them. Now, it doesn't mean that, the other 40-something%, remember, I'm not good at math. The other 40-something% of people weren't using an interpreter. It's just they were not documenting it, right? And that's hard to follow up. Now, after we implemented this, guess what? 99%. Because everyone has to now press this button, right? To say, hey, yeah, I worked in an interpreter. So then it gave us a little bit better data to say, okay, we do have everybody working with an interpreter, right? But there's more to do after that, right? If you declined, why did you decline? So there's a lot of things that we have to continually do to improve our services for our patients with OT. So I know a lot of things are happening, right? And the new executive order about English as our language has been a big deal in our community. What does that mean for our patients, right? For language access. But so far, even though it's an executive order, Title VI and 1557 remain the law. That doesn't change. And all the regulations from it is still in effect because executive orders cannot overturn these. You have to go through a very long process in order to do stuff, right? And again, me personally, even if there are no laws and regulations, I feel like we need to help our community, right? It's the right thing to do, even without all of this, right? All right. I know it's been very long. I've been sitting down for a long time. So now we're going to get up and do a little exercise. Yeah. Okay, everybody, let's get up. We'll all stand up. All right, so this exercise is you're gonna find a partner, pair share. It's called pair share. And you're gonna share with each other what you learned, or maybe something you didn't know before and now you know. Or maybe you're like, oh, this is like, I knew that, but this was good information, right? So share with each other, okay? But there's a twist to this. You have to face each other and mirror each other's motions. If it's a stretch or a yoga pose. So it's also, exercise your mind, think about, oh, what did I learn? Oh, Alice was from Hong Kong. Okay, yeah. So, shares with each other what you learned so far and mimic each other's poses. All right, go.
Yeah, so oh yeah. Yeah, I forgot. Okay, Yeah. Yeah, and I'm just always saw him. There's which I got Sandy Wilder. Don't know me.
Each part is Samantha Body. Someone and I asked, like, I don't know, forced me to survive. And then from there, opening the title because actually I found some nice project that is so I have to write down the information, you know, things like that. Let's say that like a summary of my system. And then all our different goals as to the agency and free training. Starting from the supervisor down, we can pass the course. Because a lot of them I found that they have to mark with instruction to provide an instruction. But it's like, and they just, no more, this is as roller, and you are a new, like, and you go unaware of that. I think that. So in case I have a feeling where I see the people, I say, oh, it's so. Oh, this is what they're looking for. Yes, and I also have the global zero by the Jurassic Center. Both global zero and Spanish. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it's sometimes hard when everybody's so excited. It's hard to like speak over everyone. So I found that this I kind of. All right. Okay. So next we're gonna talk about code of ethics and finance practice, standards of practice for medical interpreters. So the National Code of Ethics for Interpreters in Healthcare and also the standards were created by the National Council of Interpreting in Healthcare. This is where a lot of medical interpreters like me, we go to this website a lot to make sure that we know what our standards, follow the standards, and reference it a lot. They also offer webinars and different a few webinars to, talk about medical interpreting, either, any new regulations or any other issues, or just, interpreters wanting to share their experiences. So this is a great place to go to find more information. Anyway, so the National Code of Ethics for Health Interpreters were published in 2004 in July. And the National Standard of Practice for healthcare, for interpreters in healthcare was published in September 2005. So these two things actually go hand in hand. Right. So this is part of our code of ethics. So the interpreter has to treat everything as confidential within the team, within their environment they're in. So can't go out and talk to your friends. Oh, I interpreted for so and so, and this is what happened to them. No, you have to keep everything confidential. And again, you've probably seen this earlier, right? The interpreter needs to render the message accurately, convey the context of the message, and take into consideration its cultural context, right? So, cultural context. Like I said earlier, we don't always have one-to-one, right? But you want to convey the same message, right? Now, culture plays into this sometimes, and one of the harder things to interpret for is jokes and idioms. Those are the hardest things to interpret, right? Because the culture's different. We don't have the same humor sometimes, right? But we still kind of encourage our providers to develop a rapport with their patients. And sometimes that's how you do that, right? You make little idioms, you have a lot of idioms and things to kind of make that connection with your patients. It's a little bit harder with patients with LAP. It's not impossible. It can be done. I have an example to share. So my Spanish interpreter colleague, one day she was at the Peds hospital, okay, pediatrics. And before they walk in with the provider, they have to wear their gown, right? A PPE gown. Usually the PPE gown is yellow. So, they're putting on their gown, they're tying in the back. It's taking some time for them to do it because it's a big group of people. Like maybe 3 or 4 providers along with them. Everybody's putting their stuff on. And so there's a Spanish-speaking patient with the family. They walk in, and the doctor said, "I'm so sorry it took so long. I had to put on this gown, and now it looked like Big Bird." And, you would find it funny, right? If you're English speaking, it's cute. But my Spanish interpreter realized, what? Sesame Street in Spanish, it's not a yellow bird. I see someone shaking their head. What is the color of that bird? Anybody know? So, in Spanish, Sesame Street, the bird is, I think, green. And it's a different name. It's not Big Bird, right? It may be Big Bird's cousin, but it's not yellow, right? And so the interpreter had to quickly explain the situation, right? So the joke got a little bit lost. At the same time, it was funny, right? Even for the patient and the family. So even though the joke was a bit lost, the interpreter had to step in and explain it. It was still, it lightened up the mood a little bit, right? Because what little kid wants to go in the hospital, right? So it helped kind of lighten the mood a little bit, even if it was like a little bit of a misunderstanding. So cultural context is very important, right? Because the provider thought, oh yeah, this is cute because it's Big Bird. And it is cute, but differently, right? So the interpreter also strives to maintain impartiality and refrain from counseling, advising, or projecting personal biases or beliefs. Okay? Now, a simple example. So as interpreters, we try not to, we're in an encounter like an outpatient setting. There's a lot of waiting area places to sit, right? Now, if it's crowded, and there's only seat next to the patient you're working with, okay, you can sit down next to them. But we try not to make too much conversation with them before seeing the doctor. Sometimes it can't be helped, right? You sit next to them because you introduce yourself, right, to them and say, hey, I'll be your interpreter. Oh, one thing. How do you introduce yourself to your patient? Sometimes also depends on what language you speak. For me, if I am going to interpret for a patient, I go up to them. Good morning. My name is Wong. I mean, that's in speaking language. I'm really Wong. I don't tell people my person, not in the life specialty. But in English, I might tell you that you might miss out. Well, reason because usually you want to be polite, you're not that close to that patient, so you don't share it first. You need to tell people about your last name. And so when that patient sees me, they say, oh, Miss Wong, thank you for helping me last name. Right? So it's a cultural thing. That's why it's difficult when, I know that in the States, we want to feel closer to our patients by the doctors, right? And they'll call, hey, John, how are you doing today? I'm fine, Dr. Smith, right? But in the Chinese culture, you don't say, hey, Shu Xing, how are you today? Right? In Chinese culture, we don't do that. The doctor usually don't call you by your first name, right? They call you by your last name, right? Right? And so it's good to ask the patient, how would you like to be, addressed? How would you like to be addressed? Right? No matter which culture, thank you. Because that way it helps because, you have the nurses coming out. Alice, is your turn. Okay, that's fine. But if I'm an older person, older Chinese person, and they call me, hey, Alice, it's a little bit, it's not culturally, a little bit, not culturally appropriate. So, that's why the last name is also it. Now, not everybody knows that, and that's fine. And that's fine. So it doesn't hurt to ask, how would you like to be addressed? Anyway, so going back to striving to maintain impartiality. Okay, so you're sitting next to your patient, the patient knows that you're their interpreter, and they're sometimes very excited to know that, oh my gosh, okay, this is my interpreter. Let me bring out something. And they bring out a whole bunch of papers. What are those papers? Bills. Like maybe it's like their, healthcare bills, right? Like they went to the doctor, they had a visit, now they have some bills. And you don't understand it because it's all in English, right? And so because you're the only person in this room right now that speaks their language, I'm gonna show it to you. I say, can you help me with this? Now, you can help them with this, or you can help them with this. Sure, let's take this when we go to see the doctor. Let's see, if the doctor can help you, guide you through this. Even though you yourself can read it and understand what needs to be done, you cannot advise them, right? Because you don't know why they have a bunch of bills, right? You don't know the backstory behind what all these bills are about. So it's best because you're an interpreter, so take it to the right place and help them interpret why they have all these bills. So maybe you have to say, you know what, yes, maybe after this appointment, I can help you take it to the billing services, right? And you can ask the billing service that can interpret that conversation. Right? So because again, you don't know why this person has a bunch of bills with them. Right? And so you don't want to give them the wrong advice. And that's and we're not here to give people advice. Right? We're here to interpret from one language into another. So that's also, part of maintaining those boundaries, right? Again, refrain from personal involvement. You don't want to become, you refrain from becoming friends with your patient because then that develops bias, right? And so that's part of remaining that professional role. And then also interpreters continuously strives to develop awareness of his own and other cultures when they perform their duties. So as you're interpreting, we actually wear a lot of hats. We have to know what's going on in our minds as we're talking, right? Interpreting, we have to, in our minds, think, okay, did that patient understand what's going on? Does the doctor know what's going on? And is there miscommunication somewhere? Do I need to advocate? Is there a cultural awareness that I need to, maybe that was something. And so a lot of things actually go through our minds as we're interpreting. No one sees it. Oh, we only be ourselves once. Sometimes we do it for so long, we don't even realize it. But something comes up and you're like, oh yeah, I need to speak up now. Interpreter needs to pause this conversation and, explain what needs to be done. So there's a lot of things that goes on in our minds. it treats everybody with respect, right? That's what we should all do, not just interpret. And advocate, right? Advocate is actually a very small piece of what we do, but we have to do it once in a while. And especially if it's pertaining to the patient's health or well-being or dignity is at risk. We also strive to continue to learn, right? Because in medical field, there's always some new advancements, right? Some new things that's going on, some new treatments, right? So we have to be continue learning what's going on. We are not doctors. We're not walking dictionaries, right? So we need to keep on learning what is happening in the medical field. Of course, we have to act professional and in an ethical manner. So some of the things we talked about just now fits right into the standards of practice, right? So there's the accuracy. We have to interpret accurately and clearly, effectively, right? And then you have to maintain confidentiality, impartiality, respect, cultural awareness, boundary rules, develop professional development and efficacy. So cultural awareness, just a little bit more about that. Earlier I said, third culture kit. So we know how to navigate between these cultures, right? But at the same time, we don't know everything about our culture, right? Because think about it. Even here, maybe in Hawaii, you might have a culture in Oahu and a different kind of culture on Maui, right? A little bit different, just a little bit. And so we can say in general Hawaii's like this, but in each island, there's actually something different, right? In each culture there. So we know the general part of it. So we shouldn't always generalize. Oh yeah, because I don't know. We always do it this way. That may not be true, but maybe in another part of the country that you're from, that doesn't happen. So cultural awareness, you have to also be aware when you use that, right? You can't you try not to generalize it, but also know that if there's an issue coming up that I see, it might be because of this, right? That in our culture, we don't do this. So for example, I was at a pediatric appointment again. It was for a child who was not thriving, a toddler, they're not thriving. And so the provider says, oh, okay, so mom, when you feed your child, please put some butter or oil into your rice and on your broccoli. And then mom was looking at me and looking at the doctor like, what? We don't, in our Chinese culture, we don't put butter on our broccoli or on our rice. And so if you think about it, will that parent comply? I don't know. They may not, because this is not what they do in their culture, right? And so I had to interpret this conversation and explain, the foods that we eat, and we don't put things like that. We don't usually put butter in our rice. And so when you do that, then it's up to the provider to ask those questions. Okay, that's fine. So, what is your daily diet and what can we do to improve it, right? So working with the patient to figure out what is the best way for this child to absorb these calories that they need in a way that, that fits their diet, right? Of what they usually eat. Of course, cake is always the best one. Kids are like, yes, I get to eat cake. And that's one of the things they actually do. Providers sometimes will say, yeah, feed them, a piece of cake. Even though for us, it's like, oh my gosh. But if, for whatever reason that child's not thriving, one of the things they might do is that. At least that's what I've seen. All right. Okay. All right. So I think we're due for a break. I know we just stood up and did some stuff, but I think we're due for a break. So let's take a 10-minute break. And if you need to use the restrooms, around right and make another right, and you'll see the restrooms. Let's come back. Maybe at 11. 11:05. 11:05 is okay? Yeah. 11:05.
Great.
So that's why, Say that I think I'm identifying as oh yeah, I'm dramatic and also yeah. I'm really inspired. I'm from the community. I come from the even though sorry. Unofficial.
Probably class, yeah. No. A sense of structure at least. I don't know how they go. No, my head is not here. Right in it. And then this all about the other into it was so that helps actually.
My mother, I think went to the I can I just hope that number one, because of my due to skill that it would be my mom. I would also like
just trying to learn my setting.
And from what I've seen, I'm very shocked that some of the and then furthermore, I like you said, there's graduated board there, but growing up, so I see what I think my mom said, he's talking right, he's speaking this
I would actually yeah. Since I just
It's an average is like meals dinner, but I don't speak German. How are you going a little bit? That's what we're gonna do. So, so let me I have to ask you everything. And we have to force no, I didn't know. So you have here, I have to I really don't mind meeting, many places that but I feel like I have to see that because it is, yeah. Because I did physical reference. Yeah, I gave as a business. So that's why if I should have explore years. So that's why I can start to do it. This is one. Yes, yes. That's what I'm like, my mother asked my mom to restart. I don't like it. That's so big in she sounded like I was sorry. My mother delayed about it. That's for money. That's Yeah, and so that's why they try to have it look, yeah. So, I'm like, or actually, we have that's too much.
I have in mind just like email vehicle.
I just decided that it's slower sometimes. Yeah. Yeah. That's fine. Don't worry about it.
This poor duck is waiting it all day. All right. Okay. So. Next. So our next topic is skills of a medical interpreter. So there's three types of interpreting. I touched on them, right? The consecutive and the simultaneous earlier. So consecutive, as you heard earlier, is, you interpret, the provider speaks a few sentences, right? And the interpreter interprets, and the patient responds, the interpreter interprets. And so we have this rhythm, right? So don't do 16 minutes of a talk, okay? Don't do that. It's really hard for an interpreter. That's consecutive. That's what mostly happens at the medical setting. It's consecutive interpreting. Then we have simultaneous interpreting. The simultaneous is as the speaker is talking, you're interpreting at this almost at the same time. Nowadays in the medical setting, we have two ways of doing it. Sometimes we have webinars. We have patient teaching. And so we do it in a webinar, and it's on a Zoom. And Zoom now has a great feature. It's a we call it interpretation feature, where they have different channels for different languages. And so as an interpreter, you pick your right channel, and the participant, let's say for Cantonese, right? I'm a Cantonese interpreter, and there's a patient who's patient speaks Cantonese. They also have to choose the right channel. And when the speaker of this webinar is talking, they're speaking English, and that volume of the English is lowered. And what the Cantonese patient will hear is my voice louder, and I'm interpreting what the speaker is saying. And you can have multiple languages doing that at the same time in the webinar. So that's what has been part of simultaneous interpreting. But the traditional one is where you have might have a headset at a conference or something, right? Like I said earlier, and you have a booth partner, and you have to switch off, right? That's kind of the tradition of it. Every 30 minutes, I think you switch off. Another way of doing simultaneous that at the medical setting is, let's say the patient brings family, maybe an adult son or adult daughter, and they speak English, and they're, maybe it's a cancer patient. And the kids are always going to be very anxious about their parents' health, right? And they just want to talk to the provider about, yes, this is what mom has been doing, and this is how she's doing, which is great, right? They care for their parents, but we cannot leave the patient out of the conversation, right? You can't just have the provider and the doctor, provider and the adult child talking English, right? So we need to include the patient, and so Usually, like I said, we do consecutive interpreting, but sometimes you have the family who's just very impatient. They just want to get it going. And so the workaround is I would be with the patient and doing simultaneous next to them as the provider and the family member is having that conversation. So that, again, we have to be transparent, right? When we're interpreters, everything in the room has to be interpreted. And so I'm doing that for the patient on the side. And they're having their conversation in English. So the patient knows what's happening and can interject, right? If whatever I'm interpreting and she's like, no, I didn't have, candy that day, they can interject and say, that's not true, right? So it keeps the patient informed of what's going on and help them participate in their healthcare as well. So that's another type of simultaneous we can do simultaneous in that sense. Oh, and the last one is slight translation. Slight translation is when maybe the nurse gives you some sort of discharge information or a letter or something, and they want you to translate it. You can, so what happens is you're reading it in English and you're saying it in the target language, right? In Cantonese, Mandarin, Spanish, right? We try to keep this to kind of a minimum because one page is a lot to do within, sometimes it's just a 20-minute visit, right? That's a lot. It's taking up a lot of time. And so we try to limit it to maybe a paragraph at best. But sometimes it's hard to do that. But that's what slight translation is. I've done it where the medical student was like, I think this is some sort of like all their like vital signs from another, from China, and I can read it. So I was reading it, and then saying it in English. And they're like, oh yeah, that's exactly the terms we use. I'm like, well, I'm glad I'm doing it right. So, so that happens. You have to read, sometimes not in English, sometimes in the language you're interpreting to, back into English, to let the doctors know what this document is saying. But of course, the best is actually, send it to the translation services to get sense. And we do have translation services at UCSF. So we have interpreting services and translation. Right. So all of the things I mentioned so far from, all the laws and regulations and the code of ethics and everything really boils down to this, what the interpreter role, right, what we do. So our conduit of information, it has to be accurate, right? No omissions, additions, or changes. Same content, same tone, same volume, and linguistic register. We're culture brokers, right? Also known as culture clarifier. We provide these cultural contexts to speakers so they can fully understand each other, not just language, right, but also the culture. And we're communication managers. Like I said in the beginning, controlling the flow of the conversation, right? And maintain transparency at all time, which is we interpret everything that happens in the room, everything. Again, speed and flow. Sometimes the doctors talk too long. You have to stop them. You have to say interpret means interpret now. Giving them that pause. And so all of these things is what we do and what you see us do every day. Okay. So these are the skills, right? Some of them we mentioned. You definitely need to be fluent in 2 languages or more. You have to have your interpreting skills, excellent communications. Note taking is very important too. This is a big one. Shorthand, note taking. I think Sue, you taught me that note taking piece. And then memory skills is important. Self-care, empathy, and cultural awareness, right? To empathize with your patients to understand what they're going through, right? Because that helps with when you interpret that tone. You want to follow the same tone as that patient. Because that really conveys to the provider what is going on with the patient. Cultural awareness we talked about, and then knowledge of terminology, right? For medical interpreting will be medical terminology. And there's also a piece on self-care, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Right now, I would like to invite some of our panelists up. We have some speakers today that will share with us what other community interpreting interpreters do, and do all of these skills apply? So we'll invite them up and we'll have a little discussion.
We have another one maybe later coming.
She's interpreting.
Yes.
She got stuck.
All right. Maybe we'll start introduction this side.
Today?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, kind of weird to speak the same thing over and over again.
That's okay.
Okay. So my name is Shuxing Yang. Loving to help people. This is my short bio that I wrote for this appointment, for this occasion. So I'll just go quickly. So loving to help people is like my second nature. So that's why I'm in this business, because I really enjoy doing it, and it's like the love of my life actually. So this is also kind of part of being a Taiwanese, because we like Alyes shared yesterday that when she went to visit Taiwan, people would take her wherever she has to go to that place.
I got lost, and they're like, "Can you hope?" Yes. And my cell phone didn't work. I said, "Oh, where do you need to call?" They looked out their cell phone. So let me know where it is you need to call. So they're very helpful.
So yeah, that's kind of like being a Taiwanese. Our second nature is just whenever on the street when we see somebody kind of looking different or kind of in a confusing situation, then we will go up and then just help right away. So it's very different from anywhere I've been to also. And in college, I majored in German language and culture. I learned Japanese, and I was most fond of psycholinguistics and paralinguistics, and also some developments in science. And the other side of me is a very introverted person, so I also enjoy doing studies in classic Chinese novels and poetry. Um, that's very different from the modern language. Okay, and I have a MA degree in linguistics from Harvard University. I was a EFL English as a foreign language lecturer in Taiwan for 12 years. And at the university over there, I was able to do a lot of simultaneous interpretation for a lot of international academic conferences. So that's how I also was able to develop some skills in simultaneous interpretation. And I also did some translations for research papers. So that really helps with my interpretation. And over here in Hawaii, since 2015, the translations or interpretation occasions or settings that I've been to are all sorts, including educational, like going to school IEPs, special ed, ADHD students, or behavioral issues, students with behavioral issues with their therapists, their psychologists, or even psychiatrists, and social communal services where I've been to, or the HPD. So like even at almost like one person was in the jail, and then the police wanted, or the agent wanted to know more about why this person did this or did that, then they would ask me to interpret at that time. And also something interesting is the utility companies and insurance companies with their clients. And for insurance companies, a lot of times they will bring in some lawyers because there are also like accidents involved. So, or something that about clients' complaints. So these are kind of interesting. And then also legal issues
but most part, I only did a few court cases. But one is during COVID time, but that was over the internet actually. So that was really interesting. The proceeding is very different from nowadays, when people were live in person. And also, the other ones that I've been to are also the prosecutor's office, victim witness assistance programs, and also Legal Aid Society and DVAC. DVAC is the Domestic Violence Center. So, and also all kinds of medical areas that I have also done interpretation for. Yeah. So that's my bio. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning. I'm Melody Kubo, and I manage the court interpreter program for the Hawaii State Judiciary. We are currently the only state agency that has a program that we formally recruit, screen, train, and test interpreters, and we offer credentials as well. So I'm glad to be here. Good to see you all.
Great. And my name is Suzanne. And I've worked with Melody for many years. I got started in interpreting as a conference interpreter. We had a conference interpreter training. My teacher was like from the United Nations. And I said, I'm never going to do this. This is way too hard. Forget it. And then a lawyer called me and said, hey, do you want to do a deposition? I'm like, sure. What's a deposition? And I'm looking up what and he goes, yeah, we're going to pay you this much money. I'm like, that much money? That's a lot of money. I'm like, maybe I will do this. Because it was, I'm like, well, you can make money from doing this. And so that was awesome. And then I started, graduated from UH and stuff. And then I started teaching conference interpreting. And then we decided to open up some classes for anybody because we realized the courts kind of called us and said, hey, we need to improve our court interpreters. And I'm like, court interpreting? What's that? And so that's when I got started in understanding about community interpreting, which is non-conference. And so the community interpreting, which is what Alice was saying. And in fact, she was one of my students a long time ago. So old I am, but you're still young. Yeah, I didn't even know. And then for her to go on and actually be teaching this is just a real joy for me. And so I'm really happy to be here. I'm glad she's here. This is really awesome. Because as long as you have good, solid language skills, you can really become a good interpreter. It just takes study and study and study, and don't give up. The other thing, so then I got into court interpreting, I got into medical interpreting, and now we teach that. We teach it through KCC, the program. We just started one Tuesday night, a fundamentals course, basics course, which he put up here, called Fundamentals of Community Interpreting. And the next one will be in late July, early August. So if you're interested, maybe get your name with John. I'm Monty John, we call them both. And then I guess, right, they can get their name on a list or something.
Absolutely. And an easy way to do that is the QR code that's on your desk. It's an exit survey. It takes a while for it to load up because the connection here is kind of bad. But if you fill this out, it's just a couple of questions. We would appreciate it. And put your email. And then I will get these and I'll have your email.
Great. Let's send you a flyer for the next classes. We also, thank you. Awesome. Okay. We also just finished like a year and a half of medical interpreting program. So who knows, we might offer that in the future, court interpreting. There's a lot of training where KCC is really supporting the training of interpreters, so yay. And so we really hope to see more of you in the field. And so, yeah, I've done like everything from murders, sitting next to murders, interpreting, to rapists, to DUI, just to parking tickets and staying in the park too long. And so it's just, everything in the court is fun. I think it's fun. I think it's exciting. And also in the medical field, which is super hard because you have to know everything, which Alice already told you. The language, you just never stop learning. Anyway, that's a little bit about my background. I used to be at UH for 28 years. I was teaching at the Center for Interpretation and Translation Studies. Then I retired, and now I'm doing this again. So there you go. Thank you.
So as you can see, I highlighted empathy and cultural awareness in a different color. That's because, this is what medical interpreters need to focus on, right? But actually, I think Melody can tell us that actually that's different for court interpreters.
So our court interpreters are a little bit different than medical interpreters because court interpreters are part of our courtroom team. So, very important part of our team, essential to giving access to justice to those people who don't speak English well, which, to be honest, is a lot of people when they come to court because court is generally not a happy place, right? People are not generally there because they want to be in court today. They're generally there because they got a ticket or they got some kind of the issue that they have to resolve. So we recognize that, language is often goes out the door. So we provide interpreters for free for anybody who asks or anybody who feels like they need one. But our interpreters, unlike in the medical field, while you can have empathy, and we often do, and you can understand the culture, right? But you can't express it or act upon that. Because in court, because you're part of the courtroom team, you have to be very neutral. Very neutral. So you can't be giving advice or answering questions or even explaining that, excuse me, judge, but he answered the question this way because in our culture, blah, 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 blah. Right? So we don't, even though that's the hard part is, even though you want to say something, you can't really do that because it's not the appropriate place to do that. Yeah. So that's actually a huge difference, I think, between medical and court is because even if you feel like the person can't understand or doesn't understand because the judge's language is so high, you can't say, excuse me, Your Honor, you're using language that's way too high for him. Can you make it lower so he can understand what you are saying? I mean, you can't really say that kind of thing. So you just need to be interpreting. So I think unlike the medical field where you might be able to step in and say, excuse me, doctor, let me clarify, blah, 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 right?
Can I comment?
Yes.
It's really a matter of adversarial versus non-adversarial because you have two sides that are, adversarial in the court or in the legal process. So you can't show that you're taking sides. That's very unfair. Whereas in the medical, everyone's on the same side usually to help this person. And what's interesting is that it doesn't mean you do more than interpreting. But every once in a while, you could say, excuse me, doctor, I think they're kind of confused about the medicine. And then you just go back, and then the doctor will say, let me explain the medicine. I mean, you could if you thought it was really necessary, because it could mean life and death if they take their medicine the wrong way, for example. But you don't offer your own opinion, like, hey, did you understand what they meant by the medicine? I mean, you don't sit there and have a conversation. So the ethics are basically the same. It's only one, maybe you can, offer a little bit more input to the doctor or whoever, and then let them take over and do whatever they need to do. But what's interesting is that I also work with Language Services Hawaii. And one of the comments that we get quite often, we love this interpreter. She's not only accurate, but she's very compassionate. And I'm like, that's a strange thing to say as a compliment. But I think, so I usually tell my interpreters, no matter who they are, is be accurate, keep your ethics, but be kind, be nice. Like if somebody says, oh, interpreter, what do you think about, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you, I'm an interpreter. I mean, that's not kind, right? Just be smart. So, oh, fine. Oh, excuse me, I have a phone call. Excuse me. The fake phone call, right? It's fake, it's not real. So things, there's tricks to the trade. So I just wanted to say that adversarial versus non-adversarial. And if any of you are interested in court, they have a great basic orientation workshop that is going to be teaching soon. Anyone taking that workshop in court, the court workshop, anybody? Wow. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. One, good. Because it will be a great introduction for 2 days. It's all day. And there's also one at KCC. But the point is that you might as well learn about it. You don't have to become a court interpreter, but you might as well learn about it. Because the language it doesn't really change. It's been that way for hundreds of years, and it's really the same term. You just got to memorize it. It's kind of different than the medical, where there's a lot more terms. But anyway, I wanted to plug that in, that KCC also is supporting, and they're going to be doing one soon. So,
yeah, so we do actually have a class that's starting this summer. It's going to be half online and half in person. So 6 online evenings and 3 in-person Saturdays. And that is actually the same thing as our 2-day basic orientation workshop. It's just spread out over a little bit more time and might be easier for people to do. And it's free.
Oh, it's free this time.
And it's
That's
free.
nice. This time.
This time.
Yeah.
So thank you to KCC because they've been very, very generous and willing to support this. But because of KCC,
It's great.
yeah, take advantage of the free.
Another question. How did you all help yourself to have good memory skills? Memory skills.
I don't know, because I basically are I'm pretty good at memory things, but a lot of times there are too many things. Sometimes the doctor just go longer and longer, but he wanted to just stop at a port a certain time. And so a lot of times I just put down I take a notepad into the doctor's office, and then I'll just jot down really quickly what the most important parts, and then I would go over whatever doctor just said. Yeah, because it's easier to remember that way when you do no keeping, no taking. Yes. So like Alice just said, yeah, I also learned it in the 2-day trainings. We also had I actually 1 year in 2013 I also just took the classes just for fun. So we at that time we had a different uh teacher at that time, or instructor.
Yeah, I don't know.
She was quite different.
Yeah. So yeah, in our workshops, because we say you don't need to be an interpreter and you don't need to know anything about courts of the law either, but we do teach interpreting skills. So we have interpreter trainers like Sue, who's one of our best interpreter trainers, and they teach you how you can build your memory and how you can be more accurate. So there's tips, I guess, and skills that you can work on to build your memory, and we teach you that in the class.
Okay, this is the question I had on my mind yesterday, but I'll ask it today too, because I still have it. Since you said that, your interpreters, you're kind of doing the research on the slide because you're on the slide. What do you do when someone uses a colloquial or a slang, and it's not really in a lexicon or a dictionary? How do you do that?
That's a good question.
That you don't know the meaning, or you know the meaning?
You don't know the meaning.
Oh.
I mean, how do you get clarification?
I think when you're actually taking the classes, you'll learn how to you'll be a lot more at ease, because then I don't have to be a walking dictionary. I don't have to know all the language, because under accuracy, the code of ethics, which she talked about, under accuracy, which we have to be accurate, everything, even dirty language and sexual terminology and anger and everything we have to interpret. But there's one clause under there that says interpreters shall clarify when they don't understand, because you can't be accurate without understanding. So we teach them how to say, excuse me, doctor, or excuse me, your honor. The interpreter is unfamiliar with that term. The interpreter is unfamiliar with the phrase that the patient or that the defendant just used. May I clarify? And then you get permission, they say yes, then you say, hey, what does that phrase mean? Oh, I've never heard that. You're from Mexico, I'm from Spain. Oh, I see. Okay, thank you. And then we just interpret the meaning. So we have every right to clarify, and we do it professionally. And then everyone keeps their trust in you that you know what you're doing, because you sound professional, you look professional, even though you don't know that term. Now, you never want to say, I'm sorry, my English, I'm still learning my English. Can I ask her what it means? No, you don't want to say that, because then people lose trust in you. So you never reveal your weakness. To you, it may be a weakness, but you don't reveal it. You want to be professional.
And also do it as soon as possible. Yeah, because you really need to make things go smoothly and within the time frame. So you want to do it, get the clarification as soon as possible.
Yeah. Again, Melody, I'm thinking about when I was sitting in the court class, and you and Debbie were talking about
drug terminologies and not, the street lingo.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, so for things like that, specialized terms like that, we try to point you to resources. For example, if you're doing a drug case and you don't know a cop, cops are great for drug slang. But if you don't know a cop, then you can always look at the DEA, the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration. They release on their website publications about all the different illegal and legal drugs, and they have street slang for each one. So you can get the latest street slang. Oddly, for crystal meth, the four of the street slang are from Hawaii. They're Hawaii specific because I guess Hawaii is known for that. But there's also, thank God for the internet. There's online resources even for slang and for swear words and for so you name it, you can find it on the internet. But we do point our students to resources like that during our training as well.
And if I may, Mandarin is my B language. We talked about A, B, and C. It's my B language. I've learned it. And so my first case for prostitution, I was texting. We were outside with the defense attorney, and he says, "I want to read this police report." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I have no idea what these terms are in Chinese, because even the specific sexual parts of the body, I never learned in a class. They don't teach you that in 401 or 4. So even living in Taiwan, I never learned these terms. So I just texted a friend of mine. And how do you say a blowjob? Because I can look it up in the dictionary, but it may not be there. So I'm texting a friend of mine. How do you say a blowjob? And he's texting back. And then so we have resources, and sometimes they're not with us at the moment we need them. So we have to be able to work together as colleagues and know that we need each other. So that's kind of what I
I had a question. I think we can all imagine medical interpreting taking place in a doctor's office or a hospital or whatever, and courtroom in a court. Where does community interpreting take place? Like, what locations do you end up if you're interpreting social services or human services?
I just came from Starbucks in Kanihi. It was a counseling session. Yeah, and they didn't want to meet in the home. And the person who was doing the counseling didn't have an office or something. She runs around, and it was for Child Protective Services or something. And so we just met at Starbucks. They had an over-the-phone interpreter scheduled because they didn't have it in person. My other job at Straw was canceled. So I said, why don't I take this? Because how can you do over the phone in Starbucks? Right? How can you put the phone and then do an over the phone? Oh, could you interpret this? And then everybody's listening. Yeah, so that worked out really well. So that's an example, but you can say more examples of community
I
interpreting.
actually talked about it in my bio. So the kind of community interpretation are actually sometimes among a lot of agencies in the government buildings actually. So we have like disabled people that needs benefits, or like certain ones are like SNAP. You also go in to help them with the interpretation. And then you also have students who are ADHD or with behavioral issues. Then you do have to talk with the counselors or the school counselors or IEP programs, or um, like their therapies, their therapists, and also their um, sometimes even psychiatrists. So you go to all sorts of appointments to help them with whatever to get to their to have the treatment or get to their life next level so that they can have a better life, and then also help the family too. So sometimes the insurance company would also send an advocate supporter or their community coordinator. And then you would also go into their family or go to the house to talk to the family to help interpret. So all kinds of things like that. And then like I said earlier, you also have HBPD cases. So you will go into the police department or sometimes to the jail. You also have things like victim witness programs that you go in to help the victims to translate or kind of uh, sometimes when we go into this kind of appointments, we also have to be very careful. Sometimes some people will have really strong personalities when they hear something that's not right or something that's they may have like expressions that actually don't have any empathy on the victim. And I think that when we talked about this earlier, we have to keep neutral. And it's also very important to be kind, like what Sue just said. So we need to know where we are going beforehand and then have a mindset that's according to wherever we are going or what we are going to do. And a DVAC also, DVAC has really severe or more heavy cases. And so we always have to have like an idea that, need to be kind all the time.
I think, if I may, I think, there are over like 250 nonprofits, people who work with, everyday community people who we work with. And a lot of them are LEPs. And so, like she said, you're going to people's homes and you don't want to dress up with your tie and everything as if you're going to court. And then the next job you may have after you leave there is maybe a government office or maybe an office for pediatricians in some building downtown. And then you have to figure out where to park at Queens. And then when you're done, you have to go through. So every day you're going to different places. And I think as a community interpreting, usually here, at least on Hawaii, if you don't have a car, I do know interpreters that don't drive. And so they're taking the bus and they have to figure out their schedule every day. They have to think about what they're going to wear and maybe bring an extra jacket because it's going to be cold and then it's going to be hot. And then, you have to figure out if I go to somebody's home, can I sit on the floor? Because this is with a child and they're going to do like maybe early intervention services, and you got to sit down on the floor. Well, what am I wearing? Is that okay? And like she said, you need to prepare all these things about the location you're going, who you're working with, and think about your dress and things like that. And food, sometimes you bring some snacks into your, like I got in here, well, I don't know what time, 11, I'm like, oh, I'm starving. I haven't eaten anything all day. And so you have to think about things like that.
I think preparation definitely is very important. For the healthcare setting, we have, at the hospital, if you're going to an inpatient room, maybe it's for a family meeting, end of life meeting, you want to know that's what you're getting into before you walk in. So what we always ask is something called a pre-session with the care team, meaning, before we walk into the room, can you give me at least 1 to 2 minutes? What am I walking into? You don't always get this though. But we're now trying to, impart that piece to our care team and say, hey, introverts need to know what they're walking into, right? Think about it. Would a doctor walk into a room and not know what's going on? No, right? They probably read the chart and everything before they go and see their patient. So that's the same for us. We need to know what's going on. And as Sue says, sometimes we're running from one clinic to another and then we're hopping over to the hospital. We don't have time to go, maybe, if a staff interpreter, we can go into their chart, but we don't have time for that because we're hopping from clinic to clinic and now we're going to the hospital for a family meeting. I don't have time to chat, right? So preparation is very important. Sometimes you have to rely on a care team. So what are we going to talk about today? Because it's not just knowing what you're walking into, it's also preparing yourself mentally for what you're walking into, right? And not just terminology. You need to know the terminology. Sometimes you're probably like, you have a cell phone nowadays, you can just check it. You make sure the terms that I'm going to use is correct, right? But it's also mentally preparing yourself for what you're going to walk into, right? And sometimes the doctors might have questions for you too before they walk in. So preparation is very important, right? And then there's also something called a debrief, which always never happens, but we love for it to happen as medical interpreters. After that visit, that you allow time to actually debrief with the care team and say, if they have questions for you, hey, Alice, how did that go? Do you think that family actually like know what's gonna happen next, whatever? And you might have a sense. You're like, you know what? I don't know. Let's go back and ask, right? Or just to have that feeling that okay, is everybody okay, right? Because it was a very difficult situation. Everybody comes out of that. We're going to talk about later for self care. You come out of it a little bit traumatized, right? And so not just for you, but also for the care team too. Sometimes let's just kind of like have a little bit of a debrief and make sure everyone's okay, and then unfortunately move on to your next appointment. But preparation is very important for sure.
In Hawaii, I don't think they do because we don't work with the hospital as like employees. They don't do. They have a care team in the hospital, but they don't do debriefs or pre-briefs. But what we've made sure, at least at Language Services Hawaii, we make sure that they always ask, "What is this meeting about?" So to this morning, I had to go somewhere, and on my paperwork, it said, "This is a laparoscopic cholecystectomy." Pre-surgery. And so that was great because I'm not afraid of, as long as it's written down, I can look it up and I can find out in English what it is. And then I can find out in Chinese what it is. And then I can prepare. Yep. It's just terminology. Yep. Yeah.
You're right. Sometimes you don't get to know what's going on, but you give me a term and I know what do I mean to. Okay, got it.
And some people show up and say, "Hey, patient, what is this about today?" That is the worst of the worst of the worst. Because they may turn to you and say, "I think I have cancer. What am I going to do? I don't want an operation. What do you think? Should I get the operation?" And all of a sudden, you've gotten them all emotional, as if you're a doctor. They want to talk to you. It's just the worst thing you can do. So you don't want to do that.
No. So when I first started interpreting, I had gone to endoscopy many times. By then, many times with my mentor. So I was like, cool, okay, I'm going to endoscopy. And I know that they're going to ask a bunch of questions, before they do the endoscopy. So endoscopy is usually a scope that goes down your throat and into your stomach. They're looking at your upper abdomen. Anyway. And so hey, Alice, there's a case over at endoscopy here. Go now. Okay. So I'm very confident. I'm still very new at this. I'm very confident. Okay, yeah, I know this stuff. I walk in and I'm thinking, okay, to the left is where the procedure room are. To the right is the doctor charting. Okay? And so I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to the left to where the procedures are, the pre-op, get it done, right? And no, Alice, you're gonna walk to that side, to the right, into the doctor's chart. I'm like, okay. I go in there, a bunch of doctors, family, and all the family's crying. I'm like, oh my gosh.
The guy died?
Yes. And no one told me. No one told me this is what I was gonna walk into.
That was my first case.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm shocked. I bet I can't look like I'm shocked. I probably did. And I was like, okay. So they started talking. The providers started talking. Now that the interpreters here, they started talking. Okay, so this is what happened. This is what happened. So basically, the endoscopy went well. But unfortunately, as the patient was waking up, it's cold blue. And so the patient passed. And so, I had to interpret. I was not prepared for doing such a heavy, serious assault case. Because I was thinking, oh, endoscopy, procedure, all the routine stuff. And so that was one of the biggest shocks. Like, oh gosh, okay, so have to interpret all of that. Families crying and not understanding because how could this happen, right? It's just a routine procedure. And so that's why preparation is so good. So now I know. Back then I didn't know. So now after that I was okay. If I'm going to somewhere, what am I going and what is it going to be about? Right? Because you don't want to be walking into this and not. But this was 15, 17, when we're still trying to figure little things out, but now we have better things, we have better policies and kind of say, hey, and we have, interpreter practice to say, can you let me know what this is going to be about before we even walk in? Because that's very traumatic for the interpreter, walking and thinking, oh, I'm going to do something simple and routine. And it turns out not to be, right? Granted, there are going to be times like that, but not something that grasp it. But you're thinking it's just a regular philosophy, it turns out it was something very unfortunate. So that's why I was asking, hey, what is it about? Even if you don't get a free stuff along, just knowing the term and knowing what you're walking into.
Yeah. So our fourth panelist, Utah, was a little late.
Sorry.
She was in time.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I was just got done with my work, so straight to here.
What were you determining?
Oh, Japanese and English, and I've been working with the Helping Hands Hawaii Bilingual Access Line department. I've been working since 2007. My specialty is right on the community interpreting. So, you know, I do from the court to the medical to the social work to the education. So, like today's, for instance, today I was at the DVR. So, you know, it's coming from the public school, and then they're gonna transition to the DVR. So, you know, you have to have a lot of terminology. Vocational rehabilitation, yes. So yeah, that's exactly what I was doing. So sorry.
Yes, right. Real time interpreting, right?
Yeah. So all sorts, yeah. We go to all sorts of places to help interpret.
Right. I mean, you know, this child actually, I did the interpretation back when she was in elementary school. And then now she's like about to transition to age out, which is age out is another one is 18 or above. So they are going to transition to vocational. So, you know, those are the terminology that you don't really think about it, but, you know, it will come back. And then that's when they got to start talking about conservatorship. And then they're gonna start talking about, okay, you have to prepare, you have to do this, and then you have to bring the attorney present, and then these are the stuff, and then they would just line up all this information. I mean, they didn't expect me to do the site translation, thank God, but that's something that you need to prepare. Yep.
And oh, by the way, earlier I talked about DVAG. DVAG is Domestic Violence Action Center. Yeah. So that's also very heavy.
It is very heavy. I mean, I because of my this job, you know, I get called for yes, the DVAC. We call the DVAC, but you know, yeah, it gets heavy, and then you know you have to mentally prepare, and then be ready when you are called. You know, I mean, you were mentioning about a little bit of traumatic event. Yes. I mean, yeah. To this day, this one case that I always resonate in my head is a 3/11 when the earthquake hit in Japan, and then this family they survived, and so 3/11 escaped, came here. Mother had a heart attack, and she passed away. I got called for the transplant. How you gonna marry, prepare? You know, you just hear bits and pieces, and then is this what I'm gonna interpret? You know, you have to mentally prepare, because right there you cannot cry. I know I wanted to cry, but I couldn't cry because I have to be professional interpreter. You have to be mentally prepared, and you have to have the stamina to do so.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So,
oh,
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, mentally prepare is very important. So, now, let me prep you for what's next. So we're mentally prepared. We're going to do an exercise. And we're going to test everyone's memory skill, which is one of the important things for an interpreter. All right. So,
before we start, can I share something very different that's between medical or community interpretation and the core interpretation. Because to me, I think there are so many different things that are very different from these two big categories. So the core interpretation, I think you have to dress really strictly black and white, right? For
business professional.
Yeah, more
It's
business
okay, yeah.
professional. And then
Otherwise, a black jacket works wonders. It covers up a lot of things.
and then white blouses, right? And then the language to request for clarification is also very different. At the medical setting, you kind of is more casual. You just tell the doctor, can we pause just a second because we need clarity for both sides. And then, but at the core, like Sue just explained, uh, uh, Your Honor, we have to, there are certain jargon that you have to use in order to get clarification. So this is also very important for people who want to go into either core interpretation or medical interpretation or community interpretation fields. You need to decide, and then you need to be aware of what language you need to use. And then I also found that doing phone interpretations, it's also very different. And then um, you also need to, a lot of times, I think you need to get clarification from either doctors or patients or, at the court because you cannot make a mistake there because it's serious. There are serious consequences. So we need to be very careful when we do phone interpretations. I also have patients that complain about the phone interpretations or even video interpretation. The interpreters not only didn't understand the patient, they were actually not qualified. So they didn't understand the patient at all, and then they ended up have quarrels. They argue with each other instead of really seeing a doctor. So that was really serious. So don't when you are not really familiar with phone interpretations, don't take it. You can avoid this kind of conflicts. And then at the like I said earlier, also at the legal society and also DBAC, the victims or of crimes, we we need to be very again, the word kind is also very important to employ in that kind of setting. Um, a lot of them you're unable to imagine what they have gone through. I had a victim that went through like head trauma. So after that, she couldn't hear anymore. So it's really serious problems, and we as an interpreter, we need to be kind. And then sorry, yeah, we could. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. You need to.
Let's do our practice. Please stand up. And we're going to practice here. Let's test out our memory skills. So this practice, it's probably on the telephone, not quite. So what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna start. I'm gonna say, I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell. And let's say I throw the ball to Melanie, and Melanie's gonna say,
I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell, and I went home.
And so you're gonna say what I said at the beginning, add what Melanie added, and add your own. I'm gonna keep on going. So, go on, Melanie. To the box.
I went to the doctor and then I went home.
Because I was feeling
because I was feeling unwell, and then I went home. And then I ate some food.
Okay.
I went to the doctor because I was feeling well, and I'm not well.
And I went home.
Oh, and I went home, and then I eat some food, and then I took a nap.
Pass to someone in the back. I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell, and then I went home and I ate food and I took a nap and I read a book. Oh. I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell. I went home, I ate food, took a nap, read a book, and I went for a walk.
I went to the doctor because I feel unwell. Then I went home. I had some food. Then I took a nap, read a book, and went for a walk, and went to shopping.
Went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell. And then I went home. I eat something. Then I went for a walk. And then I forgot what she said. Oh, and I went shopping. And then I practiced my music instruments.
Now, walking, talking, and physical research. Anybody? Want to catch? Sorry. Oh.
I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell. I went home. I ate some food. I took a nap. I read a book. I took a walk. I went shopping. I played a music instrument. I sang karaoke. And I had a bag of Sour Patch Kids.
What was that you just said?
I ate a bag of Sour Patch Kids.
I don't your hand up, so I don't know about that.
I don't know. Okay, ready?
Oh. That's hard. I went to the doctor because I was feeling well, home, some foods, and took a nap. And then I went for read a book, the walk, shopping, and then after shopping, I ate some instrument, and then after that, I went. Are you? That was great. Then the shower. Right. So how was that? How was that? Using your memory, right? Trying to remember what happened.
It was easy to remember when you thought of the people that said that.
Yes. Yeah.
But if I was not looking at them, I was like,
yes,
I had to look at the person.
Yep. Yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's part of it. Sometimes you do have to look at, who's in the room, but that's why note taking is so good, right? Because if you do note taking, even if you're, note taking doesn't mean you're writing sentences. You're usually doing shorthand, right? And so if you use the symbols that that you're familiar with, that you use often, you can look at that symbol. Okay, I know this is about the hospital, and I can remember what I'm going to talk about in this case, right? So yeah, so memory skills is important, right? But also your note-taking skills, your shorthand is also the best thing. For me, my best friend is a steno notepad. Oh. Yeah, especially for like for your routine, once you become an interpreter long enough for the routine appointments, you could probably do it off the top of your head. But for, family meetings and things that are more, we have a bigger setting, the notepad is going to be your friend. And why steno? Because it has two sides, right? Do you know what steno notepad is? Yes. Yeah. So it's two sides, right? There's a line down the middle. There's two sides. So you can keep on taking your shorthand on one side and you can take the other. And then so you don't have to flip all. So that is my best friend. When I'm doing those interpreting work where it's a long one and you need to make notes. So steno notepad. So memory and a steno notepad is going to be your best friend. All right. Okay, so now that you know that we have so many skills that we need to have as an interpreter, what we really are interpreters that have been described to me at a conference I was at is that we are like ducks. Why? We look so peaceful when we're swimming on the surface of the water, right? We look so calm when we're interpreting. We're professionals. We keep that very calm face as we're interpreting. But underneath, we're like crazy, trying to make sure all the roles that we have, all the responses that we have, make sure people are understanding each other. Is there a place we need to advocacy? Is there what is looking at visual cues, right? All these things are happening in your head. No one sees it, but you know it, that this is going on, right? So we're paddling like crazy underneath, trying to make sure, stay afloat, stay afloat. And so we are really just like ducks. So that everybody remember that we're all just like ducks. Everybody gets that. Should we have translate? You are actually All right, so okay. All right, so as interpreters, we're kind of like ducks. We look calm on the surface, but we're trying to stay afloat underneath, paddling and paddling. So, all right. Okay. So earlier I said we're going to talk about a little bit more about self-care. So as medical interpreters, so again, community interpreters, we go through something called vicarious trauma. Anybody know what that is? No? Okay. So vicarious trauma. So as medical interpreter, we interpret with the I statement, meaning when the patient says, I don't feel well, what you interpret is, I don't feel well, right? Using I statements. So you're kind of taking on that patient's thoughts, or not thoughts, but it's emotions and like what they're trying to say. So it's using I statements, right? So when you do this a lot, you do this every day as a medical interpreter, right? You also, and we talked about, those very traumatic encounters that I encounter, right? The ones where the patient passed away, right? Or, maybe in the ER, right? Something traumatic happens, and you keep on using that as statement. The most traumatic would be like, the patient is going to the ER because she was a rape victim, right? And you have to say, I was raped, because that's what the patient said. And so when you do that, you kind of take on that patient's like emotions and role and feelings, and so that becomes vicarious trauma. You feeling that trauma through interpreting for that patient, and that takes it can take a really big toll on an interpreter. Having using those I statements, even for cancer patients, right? You have cancer. I have cancer, and I am going through this treatment. You keep using those those words. As an interpreter, you take that on, and you don't realize it. You don't realize it at that moment when you're interpreting, because you're in that zone where you're interpreting from one language to another to make sure everybody's understanding each other, right? Whatever the conversation is. But when you walk out and out that room, your brain now starts to process what you just said, right? What you just said, that your brain just starts to do that. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I just, talked about all these things, this case about this patient, and you feel it, and you feel that, and it become a mental and physical load on you. You take on that sadness, and you feel it in the body too. So that's why self-care is so important, because if you don't care for yourself, you don't want all this weight to be on you all the time, right? Because how are you going to help the next patient where you're, all of a sudden you're processing something that happened right before and you're trying to help the next patient? That's not going to be helpful for you or for the patient or the provider. So you need to have self-care. Self-care doesn't have to be anything very big, but it needs to be that you anchor yourself to, a hobby, right? Do the things that you love to do. Don't forget those things, right? It could be going for a walk. It could be just, what I like to do is something very simple, may not seem related, but doing something for yourself. Do a facial mask, right? Like the way to unplug. Why? For me, why is the way to unplug? My eyesight is really bad. If I take off my contacts or not wear my glasses, everybody here would just be a blur. Okay. So when I go home, I always take off my contacts. That's the first thing I do. And what else I do? I might put on a mask. Now you can't wear glasses when you're doing a mask, right? It's on your face. So that's a time for me to unplug. I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm not going to be watching TV. So it's a time for me to unplug and just close my eyes and just, and just rest. You need that. Everybody needs that, right? So those are the things you can do for yourself as self-care. At the hospital, we have chaplains, right? We have non-denominational chaplains. And so a lot of times where it's a very, maybe it's a patient that's been in the hospital for many, many days. And our interpreters have seen this patient on different occasions, right? And unfortunately, the patient passes. So what we do for our interpreters is we reach out to our chaplains. Our chaplains not only help patients, they also help the staff. And so we reach out to the chaplains and we have a debrief, so that the interpreters can unload those emotions that they have and guided by the chaplain. And that's really helpful for them. And so that's one thing, we do at that can happen at a hospital. Some other things that is helpful, again, like finding the hobbies what to do. I like to bake. So, when I'm feeling, well, I don't only bake when I'm feeling down, but that helps. So because you have a control over it, right? We putting in those ingredients, right? Because what happens is when we feel these feelings, sometimes because we can't control those, what happens to that patient or whatever it is. But when you do something that is within your control, it kind of, for me at least, it relaxes me. Right? So baking is that one of those that relaxes. And then, my coworkers get all the goodies, right? When I finish baking, I take it back to the office. But do something that you love. Don't forget that, as interpreters. Go for a walk, do exercise. Another good thing is breathing exercises, You breathe in, you breathe out. Right? And the best is if you're sitting down and you have your feet on the floor, right? You're grounded, you close your eyes, and you just breathe in. 3 counts, I think, and then 4 counts out. And just maybe a minute or two, it kind of calms you down, right? And so that's another way to do self-care. There's also tapping. Have you heard of tapping? Yeah. Yeah. So basically it's guided. Nowadays there's an app, right? And so someone is saying, like tap certain areas and you focus on that particular area that you have. And then that also helps kind of keep you calm, right? And kind of brings down your stress levels. So there are a few things that you can, do to provide self-care to yourself. Anybody else have any self-care tips you want to share? Love to hear it. Sure.
Knitting.
Knitting?
Sewing, that.
Yeah, exactly, right? Your hobby. Yeah, that's right. Like focus on something, else, right? That you love to do, right? Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Any other?
Exercise?
Exercise. That's always a good one. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Thank you. So next is interpreters at work. So I work at a hospital. I work at UCSF in San Francisco. And let me share with you a little bit of what UCSF interpreting services look like. So at UCSF Health, we have interpreting and translation services. We provide services in San Francisco, Oakland, the Peninsula, which is somewhere between San Francisco and San Jose, and any other satellite clinics or locations. We provide in-person, video, and phone interpreting. Nowadays, the video is not just on an iPad and a cart, which if you've been to the hospital, you might have seen those. Yep, exactly. Marty's one of those. The other way that we're doing interpreting now is called telehealth, and it's just video. Everybody's done video now, right? With their doctors, right? And so we use Zoom, and the interpreter, our staff interpreter, can be invited into the Zoom with the doctor. The doctor invites us, and then we can start interpreting for the patient. So that's one way we're doing it. So video is not just for the iPad and the cart, but also on Zoom as well for us. And I think different medical centers use different platforms, but we just use Zoom. So we have in-house staff interpreters. We have Cantonese, Mandarin, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Toishanese. Our Cantonese, Mandarin interpreters, I put a slash because all of our they're Chinese interpreters. They speak both. And we have one Chinese interpreter who also speaks Vietnamese. And we have another Chinese interpreter that speaks Toishanese. Anybody heard of Toishanese? No? I think I've heard about it. Yeah, some both. You speak? Oh, no, I don't. Oh, okay. I've heard of it. Yeah. So Toishanese is a dialect in China. In the Bay Area, a lot of the older generations, they speak Toishanese. So there's a lot of people, but not enough Toishanese interpreters for this. I remember when I first started interpreting, my mentor took me, I was shadowing her at an appointment. It was a diabetes appointment. And my mentor speaks Cantonese only. And so walk in there, right? And it's the older lady, probably in the 80s. And she was talking to her doctor, and you realize, oh my goodness, this patient doesn't speak Cantonese. They speak Toishanese. And we're stuck. So back then, it was hard to find a Toishanese interpreter. So my mentor tried to do her best because, interestingly, most Chinese speakers, they understand Cantonese. So they understand what I'm saying, but I can't understand what they're saying. So the patient had a scratch on her foot, and the doctor's wondering what was all about, because there was like bandages around it. And if you're in a diabetes clinic, it's very important for the doctor to know, like, your injuries, right? And so the patient's trying to explain to us what it is. And in my head, all I can think is, I feel like she has all these marbles in her mouth as she's speaking. I can't understand what she's saying. But she tried to speak slowly, and my mentor was trying to understand her. And finally, we got it. Guess what happened? There was a chicken that scratched her foot that caused her injury. I guess she had chickens. So nowadays we have a little bit more, interpreters who do Chinese. But back then when I started, there was nothing. So luckily now we have a staff interpreter that does Cantonese, Mandarin, and Chinese, which is such a relief, for us. So we have 43 staff interpreters. 6 of them is the Chinese interpreters, and the other is actually Spanish. So the Spanish population is quite huge in the Bay Area. Of course, we have to partner with our language service providers for spoken language and sign language. So imagine we don't have 43 interpreters, but we have many other languages, than this. These are just our in-house languages. So we have to partner with different agencies for spoken languages. They help us with in-person interpreting, they help us with the video, and they help us with the phone.
By the way, how many the top 5 languages that are using in your area? Yeah.
Yes, are those languages.
Are those languages?
Yep. Yep.
Like in Hawaii, it will be very different.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And then also, the Vietnamese is the newest one actually that came in, that started to trend. Before we had Russian.
Exactly. I was about to say, yes.
Russian was a very big population.
Yes.
It still is, but it's, the Russian population is getting older.
Oh.
And so the trend is kind of changing. Yeah. And then in 2013, we started to require all interpreters that are hired by UCSF to have certification for the language that we hired for. So everyone in our team now is certified. So a little bit of stats. So 10% of the patients at UCSF are patients with LDP. We have annually about 350,000 scheduled outpatient appointments at UCSF. Scheduled meaning like, any outpatient clinic. And so those do not include like inpatient, impromptu, like, just the hospital calling us, hey, Alice, we need an interpreter at, the 13th floor, or we need them at the ER. That doesn't include that number. So we have a huge population. We have, of course, 350,000, it could be one patient with like 10 visits a year, right? But this is the number of visits. So this is the number of visits. And that's why we need to partner with our language service providers, right? Because 43 people can't handle all this. And this is including many different languages. So our top is the one you saw, the top 5. But we also have a top 10. We have Japanese, we have Arabic, we have Farsi. What else is there? Sign language is definitely one of them, so we have to be able to provide services to all these languages in some form. We also do translations at UCSF. So about 1,800 translation projects annually. So each project can be in any number of pages. It could be from 1 language to 6 languages, and that's a project. So that's a lot. Right? There's a lot. So the project can be a page, or a project could be a brochure. So there's many so 1,800 is a lot. So how do we make sure that, we can provide services in a timely manner and accurate, right? And we kind of make sure that we use appropriate services for different encounters, right? So if it's something simple, or, you could do a phone, right? Phone interpreting for like doing admitting, billing services, So follow-up calls, right? A check-in, check-out. And then if something more, more involved, we can use the video, right? So it's always based on an escalating need, right? And then you have your in-person, which is, family meetings, more complex meetings. It doesn't always have to be family meeting, it could be just very complex. Or the patient's hard of hearing. They're not deaf, but they're hard of hearing. You can't do it over a phone or a video, so you have to be in person. Or teachers, like how to use a pump for medicine, like for diabetes. It's hands-on. So it's good to be in person for those. So even though, I say that, for the simple ones, you could do telephone or video, but again, an escalating need, meaning maybe the patient has dementia. You're not going to have them use a phone or a video, right? You need to have it in person, even though it's a routine type of visit, right? You need to have in person, right?
I will add on that in person for like a geriatric population and then,
yes,
psychiatric.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Those definitely require like an in-person interpreter. And then what is the availability of interpreters at, in the Bay Area for UCSF? So we have our, we call it threshold languages, which is what Shuxin was saying, our top languages, right? The top 5. So those are easier to obtain because we have staff interpreters, we have it available phone and audio. And then we have something called language of lesser demand, meaning like something like over here was examples, we have French, Portuguese, or Spanish. I'm sorry, Japanese, sorry, Japanese. It really means that for those languages, there's more educational opportunity, meaning there's more chances of someone learning that language, right? And maybe becoming an interpreter, right? But there's also languages of lesser diffusion, which is less on-demand available, and we definitely need to schedule those. And what are those? Those are like your indigenous languages, right? So for the Bay Area, it would be languages from South America, Zapotec, Hmong, those languages, those are hard to find. And so sometimes we need to even outsource it from another state. The vendor needs to find someone out of state. So they may not be in-person available. It may only be a phone or a video. That is the only thing that there's not at all. Good question. So the other thing sometimes you would ask is, do you speak a second language? Are you fluent in a second language? Right? That maybe we could have an easier time to source. Now, this is also a very delicate question because depending on where they're from, the second language may be the language of, the oppressor, right? Maybe they were a colony before and they were forced to speak a certain language, that person, that country's language, which is not their own. So you have to ask, you have to ask it in a respectful way. There's also like languages, like I said, indigenous languages where, even though I say Zapotec, it could be, they actually divide it into like certain areas. It could be this town and this town, they do not communicate. You still call it the same thing, but different areas have a different dialect. So they may not actually speak the same. So you have to sometimes, for those languages, you have to ask, which town are you from? So that we can find the appropriate interpreter for that patient. Because even though you say, oh yeah, the patient speaks Zapotec, but where, can you describe it more? Can you ask if it's from which village or which town? So that we can find the appropriate interpreter. And so at UCSF, we also have a way to dispatch our interpreters. Think of it kind of like an Uber. So the providers or the clinic will put in a request on our online system. By the way, this is all HIPAA compliant. There's no patient information on here. After you put in the request, it goes into a queue like this, into a queue, and our interpreters can see it per their specific language. They have an account, and they can accept the assignment for the day. So as you can see, after they accept it, it shows accept. And it tells me which interpreter accepted it. And this is our Chinese interpreter, Wei Jun, Rachel. So she accepted this assignment at this location for Cantonese, right? And then if they have arrived, it will show that, oh, Omar arrived for the patient who speaks Spanish. And it shows the time of arrival as well. So the providers actually see this in real time. So they can keep track. They say, oh yeah, okay, Rachel's on her way, or Omar is on his way. Actually Omar arrived. Let me look for him. Maybe he's just still in the waiting area. So this is accountability, right? To show that, hey, we do provide interpreters and interpreters are on their way. And this is another good thing about this is, remember earlier I said that we have a hard stop, right? Where providers have to click, how did you provide language access today? I worked with in person or a phone, right? They have to click the little box before they can close out their progress notes. So what if the provider says, shoot, I forgot who helped me today? They could actually go here and change the setting to complete it, and they could check who worked with me today. They could look it up per their clinic, right? Or maybe they can even put in the patient's MRN and it'll pop up for that day. This is the interpreter who helped this patient, and they can finish it. So, yeah. So this is a system that we use. It generates reports for us, so we can have accountability and keep track.
Question.
Yes.
Okay, so if you are employee let's say in a hospital, right? So do you share, can interpreters see what the doctors know, or what is gonna be, what am I anticipated to?
I think maybe it's, I can't speak for all hospitals, but at least at UCSF, when you're an employee, you do have access to the EMR, to the electronic medical record, so you can be able to see that.
Yeah, whereas, let's say we don't, because we don't share, you know what I mean? That's why you developing all this terminology, because otherwise you don't know what kind of diagnosis they got.
And so that's a great point, because for freelance, right, for our agencies, how do they know? How do they know what appointment they're coming to at UCSF? Well, that Uber system I just described, we have partnered with our agency so that they can see these appointments. So if there's notes, the notes have no PHI. The notes might say family meeting, endoscopy, something that tells the interpreter what kind of appointment they're going to. It's not just good for us and as staff, also good for our agency interpreters to know, oh yeah, okay, I accepted this work and it's going to be about this. So that helps the interpreter prepare. And so that's one of the things we also do. When we work with our agency, we try to also let them know, hey, this is going to be about this issue, because we don't want to leave them in the dark either, right?
Another question. So, when are you coming to Hawaii to help us set up a system like UCSF?
Well, I would love that. Yes. We need a lot of headache.
Yes.
That was great. When do UCSF implement that?
Oh, good question.
Before that.
Yeah, so before we implemented this in 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, so before that, we had pages, we had phone calls, we had emails, we had people just, pulling us in and say, hey, can you come interpret? We had so many different ways to receive a request. We had 6 dispatchers, which is crazy. So we had to, again, how do we improve our services, right? As we saw, regulations, we have to continuously improve. So what do? We cut down on waste. We use a method to look at a request going through from the time they're requested to the time they get to the interpreter. How long does it take? We did a whole Kaizen. We did a whole meeting on this to figure out what is the flow and how can we cut down on this. And we realized if we use a system that you only have almost just one way of requesting an interpreter, you funnel all that into one way, then you cut down all this waste of like a pager or a phone call, right? Or writing it down on paper, because that can get lost, right? And so we funnel it down to just one way of requesting an interpreter. And that's what we came up with. And we partnered with a company that actually does this for other medical institutions too, around the States. So that's what we did. So before that, it was very chaotic. A lot of paper, a lot of paper schedules. But now there are no paper schedules.
Yeah.
It's just web-based. Yes.
The follow-up to stop. I know ECS have partners with like HPE, for other health systems here, but in particular services that are hard to get. In that case, does INTEF share some of it? Or are there interpretations for those older ones?
I'm not sure actually. That's a good question. I haven't encountered requests from Freewood. But that could be something to look into. Yeah. So because the system is you know, it's not they work with this company works with other medical centers. Yeah, they work with like what was it? Famous one is Duke Hospital.
No,
Yeah. Yeah, they work with Duke UNC in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they work and also on the West Coast as well. So yep. So now path to certification. So right now we have national certification for medical interpreters. There's two actually. So we have the National Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters, CCHI.
Yeah.
And then there's the National Board of Certification for Medical Interpreters, NBCMI. And I'm also going to talk about something called alta language testing in a little bit. Right. So CCHI, their certification, a full certification, they have Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic. That was what they first came up with. They started in 2009. So they celebrated their like 15 years last year. And they actually developed their own tests. They do a lot of extensive research to create these tests. So because it takes many years to develop a test, they've started with these three, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic. And then for other languages, they have something called Core CHI, which I held this certification for many years because I'm a Cantonese medical interpreter and they don't have Cantonese up here. And so I held that for a long time. So which Core CHI? So Core CHI is they test your knowledge, right? You code your standards and your ethics and your interpreting skills. So that's our written test. And then just recently, maybe 2 years ago now, they came up with Core CHI, key for performance. And now it's for all languages. What does that mean? That means after, I think it was like, it took them 6 to 7 years to develop this new test where they test your interpreting skills in English. So it's called the E to E, English to English test. So how this works is the expectation is that, you have to have very good command of the English language, right, to become an interpreter, at least here in the US. So they test your skills in English. So paraphrasing, what was it? There's a few other. But they test your different skills and it's all in English. But you might think, Alice, that's easy. I'm an interpreter. I could do that easily. But actually, not so much. Because I went through the test, I'm like, wow, this is actually not easy. You know why? Because as an interpreter, you're very used to interpreting from English into your target language, right? And then from your target back to English. So your brain is trained to interpret into a different language. But now they're telling you, no, we got to do it back into English, right? And so how do you train your brain to do that, right? So it's a lot of practice. And they do have practice tests that you can do, and they kind of tell you, the different sections. If you go online, I have some handouts if you would like. I can put it here later on to look. And that's how they test your interpreting skills. And at the end, they have a part for your language skill, where you have to describe something in your target language. And so once you pass that, you are a fully certified medical interpreter.
Are they going to keep all three tests?
Good question. So because now they have the core CHIP, they're going to slowly sunset the core CHI. So by 2027, they're not going to administer this test anymore. They have to wait out until, because so all certification we do every 4 years, right? So they have to wait out until the folks who still have the core CHI to take this one so that they can start, in order for them to phase out the old test. And all the tests are accredited for this for CCHI. And the next national certification that's available is from NDCMI. And so you can see they actually have certification for a few more languages than CCHI. The renewal is every 5 years. They have something similar to CCHI where, for non-language based system. So languages that they don't have up here, you can still take the test. Again, it's a written exam, still based on your knowledge of interpreting your ethics and standards. The exams, though, it's not developed by NBCMI. It's actually valid through a third-party organization. So it's a little bit different. But in all intents and purposes, they're both national certifications, both NBCMI and CCHI.
So this certification, it's either or the movie have to take the both?
Either or.
Okay.
Yeah, either or. Okay. And we're finished on time, so I'm going to try to go this question. So why do you want to talk about this language testing? This language testing is something we use at UCSF. What we use it for? Testing bilingual skills for medical setting. So if you're a provider and you are bilingual, you can take this test and this one, CCLA, and see if you can, if you pass it, you can speak directly to your patient in their language, not to interpret. This is not a test to interpret. Not a skills, interpreting skills test. It's a test to see if you can speak to your patient in that target language, right? And think about it. Most providers probably, grew up here in the Netherlands, they speak English. So this tests how well their knowledge in, let's say, Spanish, how well are their medical terminology in that, in order for them to actually speak to patients in their language. After they take it, they don't need an assistance from an interpreter, and that's fine, but they can still request us. Let's say it's a very complex situation and they want to just focus on, the case, the diagnoses, and not have to think about, saying it in another language. They can request our service and we will definitely still go and assist the patient provider. We also have something called a qualified staff, bilingual staff. So this is for your MAs, right? Your medical assistants, or any of the staff who have bilingual skills, and they talk about the patient's health information. That's when you need to get certified as well to do that. Now, if let's say you're like, Alice, I'm just a front desk person at a clinic, but I can speak Cantonese and English. Do I need to take the test? If you're not going to talk about anything that's medical, it's just like checking in, checking out. Sure, you don't need to take the test. Or, if you just want to help the patient, say, oh, do you need a cup of water or can I get your blanket? Those things, you don't need to take a test, right? Because if you have those language skills, you're welcome to use it because we want patients to feel comfortable and have a good experience. All right. Quiz time. All right, let's see if you guys remember. An interpreter, what does an interpreter do? Oral, yeah. Yep. Yep. And then a translator? Yay, all right. Okay, bonus one. A doctor using a scalpel and yay! All right, again, if you don't remember anything else, please remember these. Please remember these. All right. Now you know, and know this half the battle. If you're born in the 80s like me, you know this is from G.I. Joe. And this is their PSA. After the cartoon, they always, do a little PSA. Don't talk to strangers. Don't be kind to strangers. And then now you know this half the battle. All right. All right. Lastly, I do want to share something that it's really resonated with me especially in my times when I'm down as an interpreter, or just, with the COVID and everything. It's called the paradoxical commandments. Anybody heard of it? No. It's by someone who actually lives here in Hawaii. He went to school here, went to high school here, and went to UH here too. His name is Dr. Kent M. Keith. And he came up with these paradoxical commandments. And I think what resonates with me is I feel like that is the attitude that I feel like medical interpreters have that we need to take when we go into do this work. All right. So the first one is people are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. Love them anyway. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Do good anyway. If you are successful, you win false friends and true enemies. Succeed anyway. The good you do today will be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. Honesty and frankness make you vulnerable. Be honest and frank anyway. The biggest men and women with the biggest ideas can be shot down by the smallest men and women with the smallest minds. Think big anyway. People favor the underdogs but follow only top dogs. Fight for a few underdogs anyway. What you spend years building may be destroyed overnight. Build anyway. People really need help but may attack you if you do help them. Help people anyway. Give the world the best you have and you get kicked in the teeth. Give the best the world you have. Give the world the best you have anyway. I really think these resonates with, community work, right? And just an attitude that I think is very positive. So I hope you also think this is important as well. And one last activity before we head out, motivating you for the future. So after listening to me talk for so long, I want you to think about what would we need to do to continue this journey of medical interpreting or community interpreting. What do you want to do to continue that, right? So I would love you to write a postcard to yourselves. Anybody know what postcards are? Anybody been writing postcards? All right, so yesterday's workshop, someone asked me, where do I put the address? Let me show you. This is where your name goes. This is where your address goes. If you care to write one to yourself, I will send it back to you during the summer. So it's a good reminder. Hey, I said I was going to do this. Did I do it? Did I not? Or maybe your dreams have changed, right? Or your goals have changed. So, but in any case, I would love for you all. I have one. Okay. Yes. Yes. All right. So.
While Alice hands these out, I want to remind you, it would be really helpful if you guys do the workshop. It takes a while for this to load up. So hit it with your phone now, and while you write yourself a postcard, this will load. Awesome.
And Monty, are we able to get the slides up?
That's Alice, I guess.
She said yes yesterday, but I don't know if are you good? They're very useful.
Yeah, there's a lot of details.
Yeah. I think that's pertaining to some San Francisco, but maybe we can set up a system in that.
Oh, I'm gonna totally